I call this meeting to order for, is it Monday? Monday, May 1st, 2023. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Susan Payne,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Dusty Wright,
Here.
Commissioner Sharon McDonald is not here, Commissioner Josh Reardon,
Here.
Commissioner Stephen Burnett,
Here.
Commissioner Cara Melton,
Here.
Commissioner Nick Paul,
Here.
Acting City Manager Hernandez,
Here.
City Attorney Ashley Smith.
Here.
The clerk is present. Madam Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Rachel. I need to start with a motion to approve the agenda. I guess no pledge. Okay, motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
I have a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Wright. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Commissioner Burnett. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, and motion passes 6-0. We're going to start, probably should mention, I guess, for the record, that this is our budget hearing workshop. And we are going to start with a presentation from our Finance Director, Evelyn Huff.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, Acting City Manager. We are here to discuss the FY 2024 budget, which is coming to you initially for the first look right now, and then it will come to you for approval in May, which actually we're in May now. So if I could have my PowerPoint. All right. So I'll be presenting the majority of this tonight, and then we'll have a little bit of an introduction from the acting city manager, and then my budget analyst, Maurice Gutierrez, is here to assist. So we'll have the acting city manager introduction, the budget adoption timeline. We'll go over the budget, all funds combined. We'll talk about each fund type. We have a very short gross receipts tax overview, and we'll touch a little bit on the approved capital. So Stephanie, if there's anything you want to add, now's the time.
So as you know, it's a long, drawn-out process. Department start entering their budget back in November. The managers go over with the directors December, January. Then we start having director meetings where each director comes in with their managers and we go line by line, make adjustments. They put their requests in, they put their capital, they put anything that they need. We go through that. And then after all that's done, Evelyn, me, and Brian, and Maurice, we go through it about 4 or 5 more times. So we've looked at this extensively, so we're presenting you with what we believe for the city needs in the next fiscal year. And of course, it's not a static budget. It evolves all year long, so that's when you see the budget resolutions come through. So shout out to Evelyn and Maurice because they worked a lot on this.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our budget adoption timeline, obviously tonight we have our first of our budget public hearings. If needed, we have them scheduled through the rest of the week. Then our plan is to bring the preliminary budget to the regular city commission meeting on May 23rd. This helps us meet our deadline of submitting it to DFA no later than June 1st, 2023. So we have to have it uploaded in their LGBMS system by the end of the day on May 31st. After we close FY23, we revise the FY24 preliminary budget as necessary. This means bringing over the actual cash balances, any carryovers, and then we also do a more comprehensive salary and benefit roll, which allows us to capture our current staffing levels, our current staffing needs, everything like that. We will then bring this back to you on July 25th at the regular commission meeting to approve what by DFA is considered the final budget, but it's obviously in no means the final budget as we revise it throughout the year to deal with operational needs. But we do submit it to DFA no later than July 31st, and again, that's into their online LGBMS system. All right, budget overview, all funds combined. So this is every fund that we have in the city of Alamogordo, every dollar that we have budgeted. As you can see, we have our FY23 projections as they stand now, and our FY24 proposed as they stand now. So, as usual, we project the cash at what it's going to be at the end of the fiscal year. We don't try and do any sort of increased cash projecting. So we basically assume that we're going to earn every dollar that we say we're going to, and that we're going to spend every dollar we're going to. As you can see, that causes about a $28 million difference because we very, very rarely spend every dollar that we say we're going to. So in this case, it's showing a large decrease in revenues. Again, we're very, very conservative when we budget our revenues. We don't want to overextend ourselves because, as we know, it's very easy to spend. It's very easy to increase your expenditures, but it's very hard to increase your revenues in government. So we are conservative with our taxes. We're conservative with our user fees. Our transfers in and out, we'll talk about that a little bit as we get to more of these funds, but the majority of these are subsidies for the special revenue funds or the non-special revenue funds that cannot support their operations without an influx of cash from the general fund. And then we also have several capital transfers that are in there as well out of gross receipts tax funds. So we show that our ending balance for FY23 is going to be $59.2 million. We're currently reserving $6.1 million across all funds. Coming back up to the top, our FY2024 proposed has us starting with $59.2 million of cash and ending with $56.2 million. And again, holding $5.6 million across all funds for reserves, which includes our required DFA reserve, our subsidy reserve, and any debt service reserves that we have. Are there any questions on, this is the big overview, all funds combined? Okay.
Nobody? Nope, we're good.
All right, let's talk about revenue. So as we were talking about, our revenue assumptions are very conservative. We use a 3-year average for our gross receipts tax. We do not include any increase, so we do not assume, one, any sort of economic growth, and we do not assume any new taxes that would be passed by you all or the voters until obviously those have been voted on. We don't assume any of that. Property tax, DFA actually gives us a formula to calculate this. There's a form that we have to fill out, so we use the DFA formula. We assume a 95% collection rate, which is pretty much right about where the county is. 95 is low. Usually they're closer to 97, but that's one of the options that DFA gives us on that form. Same thing with franchise fees. We're not projecting any growth. The charge for services, those are projected by the individual departments. Since they're the ones that charge their fees, they have a good understanding of where they're going and kind of what their usage rates are. Investment income is based on the current earning rates. This has been really good for us. Interest rates are up, and so our investment income has been super, super good. And so we've been very proactive with taking the liquid cash that we have available and making sure we get it into accounts that allow us to get some good earning rates, but of course are still completely backed by collateral. And grant revenue will carry over based on agreements. Again, we don't assume that we're going to get any grants. We don't budget those grants until after the agreements have been voted on by the commission. All right, revenues. So this year we're projected to get $25.6 million in taxes. This does not include our state shared fees, which are listed a little bit further down, which is 11.6. So as you can see, on both of those items, we've kept the projections the same way we've been doing them now for 4 years, with a 3-year average, which ends up being a little bit less than what we've received. But we'll see towards the end of the presentation kind of where gross receipts tax has gone over the last couple of years, and where we think it's going. At this point, as you can see, the only type of revenue that we have projected any sort of increase in is the investment interest, and that's just because interest rates are really good right now, and we don't see them going down anytime soon, as they're used to kind of deal with the inflation. So we're going to keep riding that train as long as we can. Grants, obviously, $1.5 million is much lower than 17.6, but a lot of that grant income will carry over if it hasn't been used, and then we're always seeking new revenue sources. Any questions on the high-level revenue overview?
What is the miscellaneous revenue?
Sure, so the miscellaneous revenue is just kind of all of that random stuff, reimbursements, refunds that we get from other places. There are some, let me flip my page here, sale of scrap, some of our land sales are in there. We do have some types of interest that fall into that. And then administration fees are another thing that falls in there. So miscellaneous revenue is really a catch-all across all of the different funds.
And a 40% decrease, that's just being
That's-
conservative.
And especially with the miscellaneous revenue, a lot of times that's stuff that we don't budget until we get it because it's not predictable. So for example, in FY23 in abatement recoveries, we've received $129,000. Well, we haven't received it, we've charged $129,000, but we're modified accrual, so it goes on our P&L right off the bat. In 2022, that number was $225,000. In 2021, that number was 0. So in, those cases, that's just not something we try and project because there's no really rhyme or reason to it. Next year, code enforcement could be going gangbusters, it could be 300,000, or it could be 3. So that's kind of how all the miscellaneous revenue is. Any other
Any
questions?
questions? Nope,
All right.
I think we're good.
So this is just a little bar graph of the major revenues, just to kind of see where we've been going. You'll notice, and like I said, we'll talk about this a little bit later too, FY21, FY22, so the first 2 bars, those are the actuals. FY23 is our current adjusted budget, and FY24 is our projected. 22, we had a really good year in taxes. 23 has come a little bit back down towards the median, and then where we're at 24. Same kind of thing with our state shared taxes. They tend obviously to follow close with the gross receipts taxes. Our users fees, of course, they saw a boost as we were able to finally open up in FY21 into FY22. And then we're just planning a little bit of a lower number in FY24. I'm sure we will exceed that number, but we're just being a little conservative. So just a visual representation of what we've done the last 4 years. Any other questions right now in revenues? We'll talk about those a little bit more as we get into kind of specific areas. All right, expenditures. So of course, salaries and benefits is our number one thing. Spend a lot of money on human capital. This projection does include the step increases. And I'm going to give you guys a caveat right off the bat with the salaries and benefits. We do not know what we're going to pay for insurance next year. Kim has been really diligent reaching out, asking Sarah, something like that, about what they think. Are we going to see an increase? What are they thinking? And they won't say one way or the other. My assumption is we're probably going to see an increase. We haven't seen an increase for several years. That was due to COVID, and I have a feeling at some point that's going to have to give. So I expect in between when we approve the preliminary budget to when we do that final roll for the final budget, that we're going to see an increase in our health insurance. The nice thing that we did see is we saw a pretty substantial decrease across the board in our workers' comp. They went back through, they've done a ton of work on the workers' comp, and almost every category in the workers' comp decreased. So That's been a nice thing. All of our other categories, like I said, we'll talk about these more as we get there. These are the things that we really focus on when we're looking at our city manager, director meetings that we have. We go through everybody's expense lines, where the money should be allocated, where it has been, or what's the best use. You'll notice the other services show decrease. A lot of times other services is where a lot of our contract services stuff falls. So a lot of our plans that we pay for that are budgeted in FY23, but they're kind of a one-time expense. They live in other services. Other expense is, again, one of those categories where a lot of different things fall into other expense. And we can touch on that a little bit more with specific funds. Our debt service is pretty flat. We have not added really any new debt service since our drinking water revolving fund loan, which that we're fully paying on in FY23. And then capital outlay, as usual, looks very heavy in the current year. A lot of those projects won't be completed in FY23 and will carry over to FY24. We have not planned a lot of new capital in FY24, as you'll see when we get to the approved capital list. Partially it's because we still have a lot of outstanding projects and equipment purchases that have not been completed, either due to supply chain issues or availability issues. So we didn't want to allocate a whole bunch of money to capital when we still had a bunch hanging out there. Any high-level questions on expenditures? Like I said, we'll dive into these a lot more when we get to everybody's individual pages.
We're good.
And one thing, just to point out, because Maurice did a really good job of putting the books together, there is on page 5 and 6 of your budget books, there is an expense category portion which talks about all of the different expense lines that fall into other services, utilities, other expenses, everything like that. So that's also a great reference that we'll probably refer to other times this evening. All right. So this is my favorite part. Maybe if I can get my little clicker to work. Oh no. Turn it off, turn it back on.
I just do want to add for the record that Commissioner McDonald did enter the meeting at 5:47.
Rachel, I broke your clicker. Maybe needs another battery? I don't know.
Gotta love technology.
And I just keep clicking at it, like that's gonna just suddenly make it work. AAA. Nope. Ah, there we go. All right. My favorite part, my pie chart. So this again is just a visual representation of the numbers that we had on the slide before, showing salaries and benefits as the largest portion of our pie. Other services, supplies come in as another large portion, and then some of our smaller things, including maintenance, utilities, debt service, and then capital. So, okay, expenditures by category. So this is a 4-year representation, although I noticed FY21 dropped off capital outlay for some reason. So you can see where we've been, where we're going. Other expense, you'll notice it shows in the negative. There are some accumulated depreciation expenses and some other expenses that end up showing negative at the end of the fiscal year for accounting purposes. They kind of end up sitting there. They look a little weird. But you'll notice kind of where we've gone in salaries and benefits, supplies, maintenance. Other services, again, looks really high right now. There's some really large contract service projects on that, including Dudley Schools there as well. Debt service was really high in FY22 because we refinanced several loans, which means we have to pay them off, which means that sits on our debt service. So it looks really high for 1 year, but then it kind of comes back down. All right, budget overview per fund type. Excuse me, so I kind of changed this up this year. Instead of having different graphs and different charts and stuff like that, what I did was put screenshots of the summary pages that you all have in your summary book in the PowerPoint presentation, so hopefully it's a little bit easier to follow along exactly where I am. So obviously we're going to talk about Fund 11, which is our general fund, our largest fund, our main revenue recorder, and of course several different departments live in here, including all of the administrative budgets, fire, police, dispatch, animal control, so most of the general services. So the top part is a snippet of our recap from our last budget revision. So as you can see, we were standing at $23 million in estimated revenues. We were transferring out about $12.8 million. Our budgeted expenditures were $20.8, and our estimated ending cash was $7.7 million, of which 2.2 is tied up in reserves. We took that 7.7 number, we brought it down for FY24. Our estimated revenues 21.7, transfer out 10.5. And to note, the transfers in FY23, those are all capital transfers, that capital projects that are being paid for by gross receipts tax funds. We are budgeting $15.8 million in expenditures, should leave us with a cash balance of $3.2 million. Take off 1.7 for the initial local, not local, but local and state reserve requirements, and that gives us about $1.4 million in the general fund, estimated for the end of next year. General fund revenues, as usual, are driven by the taxes. The first tax line, that's our gross receipts tax that lands in this fund. And then the state shared fees, the $10.2 million is right under that, along with fees and permits, user fees, fines, and then some miscellaneous revenue that also lives in the general fund. So is there any questions on the general fund revenues?
You said that the GRT is based on a 3-year average?
Based on a 3-year average. So we're taking, right now we're taking 2023, 2022, and 2021,
So
which is
pretty
good
flat.
because 2020 is weird.
Yeah.
So we're kind of maybe getting back a little bit to actuals a little bit, maybe.
I mean, considering it's really not that bad, so.
All right. So again, this just shows we're projecting $21.7 million for our general fund. Transfers in, general fund is really rare. Like I said, this year we've got Fund 69 is reserved for public safety buildings and fire stations and the library. It's kind of an interesting combination. So that $780,000 is funding some projects for those. And then Fund 96 is our vehicle replacement. That's to replace a totaled police vehicle. so that that's not counting against their operating budget. So as you can see, we don't have anything right now projected for FY '24. Transfer outs, however, are a huge part of Fund 11. So the transfer out to Fund 12, that's the internal services account, personnel, fleet, HR, purchasing, facility maintenance are all housed in Fund 12. Fund 19 is the court state automation fund. Sometimes needs a little help along because that funding has just decreased every single year. Fund 20 is the Civic Center Fund, which is formerly funded by the lodger's tax. And so this is to make up the difference in between what's left over of the lodger's tax and what needs to be funded out of 11. Fund 27 is municipal court. So this is to make up the difference for the operations of municipal court. Fund 32 is community services, so the rec center, parks, the zoo, the library, and the administration of those particular programs and buildings. So obviously that's usually a large one for us. Fund 63, that is our engineering fund. So all of our project management and engineering is paid for by a bunch of different funds, but Fund 11 has a lift out of that. 71 is our senior center. So this helps offset the cost of those to go with the federal and state funding that we receive. 75, that's our senior companion and foster grandparent fund. Fund 90 is the golf course, and Fund 91 is the airport. So additionally, those are their operating transfers. And then Fund 125 is the cannabis fund. For FY '23, the $102,000 transfer was to cover any overages that the cannabis tax did not cover with the retention bonuses that we are paying to the police officers. So far, we've only had to transfer like $1,500. The cannabis revenue has covered those retentions almost completely. So that plan was not included in this budget. So that is something that can be readdressed in between the preliminary budget and the final budget. Any questions on transfers?
Nobody?
All right. So this is an overview of the expenditures. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I have individual slides for these departments, but this just kind of gives you the summary of where everybody's at and where they're going. There's not a ton of increases across the board, so we'll just jump into each individual department. Maybe. I thought I put in each individual department. I guess I didn't. All right, let's go to your books. So what happens when you do your book at like midnight? Okay, so page 7 for the legislative, that is, of course, covers the commission. On that, we do have to make a note. We discovered an error. So it is, we thought that one less commissioner was opting in for health insurance. What it turned out is one of the codes being used on one of the commissioners was not functioning properly. It's functioning properly on the live side, so everything through payroll is fine. It's just not functioning properly on the budget side. So we have corrected that, and so there will be a correction in your salaries and benefits when we bring the final budget. So they did not go down by $7,500. And then the other big change on the legislative portion is a decrease in the cell phone expense. As you all know, cell phones were issued. We really estimated, we weren't really sure how much it was going to end up being. And so now we have a better idea. So that's kind of the two really big changes on the legislative portion of the budget. Do you guys have any specific questions on that? Okay, next page, page 8. Executive city manager, so this is the part of the budget that houses the city manager, the assistant city manager, their executive assistant. Previously, it had housed the PIO, the marketing and branding, and other communication-based positions. Since these books were created, the PIO position has been changed to an additional marketing and communications position. So now, those positions have also been moved into their own department within Fund 32. So when looking at the expenditures for the city manager executive portion, it's just housing the city manager, the assistant city manager, the executive assistant are the only ones that are housed in this particular part of the budget. In saying that, there is a decrease in their travel. Their travel was budgeted a little bit higher this year. That hasn't been used, and so in the city manager director meetings, it was discussed about that not needing to be at such a high level. So that's where the $3,500 decrease there comes from. Any questions on the city manager executive budget? Okay, the next one is page 9, which is legal. We had some changes in the salaries and benefits there, mostly because we had new employees start who had less seniority. We had 2 main positions change, both of which had more seniority, obviously, than the people that were hired. Other than that, the only biggest change is the other services. This was a change in the contract services and the legal services lines. One, we felt like there was a little bit of redundancy there. The legal service and the contract services were kind of being used interchangeably. And over the last several years, they've averaged less than $10,000. So we went ahead and dropped that line down by $61,000 to kind of even that out and not have redundancy in the expense lines. Any questions on legal?
Have we ever looked at hiring an assistant attorney again, or have we scrubbed that completely?
So it's not something we included in this budget. It wasn't something that was part of the personnel request. However, Ashley was really new at that point in time. And as she told me today, she's like, I've been here 6 months. So I know it's something she's looking at, so I can let her talk to that.
So,
We've always had one, the question.
yeah, with this budget, I didn't budget that in because, like Evelyn said, I was very new to this. I fully expect probably next year or the next budget, after this one, I probably will be requesting that. But like I said, I just didn't want to be brand new doing budget plus asking for all that. It was a little too much for me at this time.
Any other questions for legal? Okay. Moving on to page 11 for the city clerk's portion. The city clerk's portion, salaries and benefits, looks a little weird because they have had all sorts of changes. And at the time that this report was done, they had a full opening that was being budgeted with full insurance. Since then, they've had some more turnover. So this is a number that preliminary right now is probably a little bit higher than it's actually going to be now that they have those positions filled. So it's another one we'll be looking at really hard when we do the preliminary to final. Other than that, they've had just a couple little changes, some removal of contract services that hadn't been used, and the increase in maintenance is their vehicles are getting a little bit older, so we're expecting that they're probably going to need some fleet parts. So just a couple changes there. Any questions, City Clerk? All right. Page 12, Finance and Accounting. So our changes, we did some moving around of our accounts payable specialist. We moved one accounts payable specialist position to purchasing. We decreased another one, so that kind of changed our salary and benefits a little bit. And then our increase in other services is we always have to plan for an increase in the audit. The audit goes up every year as they add more requirements to it. And then we did have some one-time software expenses that we purchased in FY '23 that will move to the IT budget in FY '24. So, any questions on finance?
We only have you budgeted at 80%.
That's because the other 20% comes out of the water fund because I oversee utility billing. Oh, because I work for a discount. All right, page 13. Accounts receivable is kind of a little bit of a leftover from prior when we had a bunch of, when we actually had an accounts receivable department. So what we decided this year was to go ahead and leave the salaries and benefits that are in there, which is for the customer service representatives up front, and to go ahead and take the little bit of supplies, a little bit of maintenance that was in there, and I fully expect probably next year we're going to have even a better idea of kind of what that allocation needs to be for the customer service reps. They don't do 100% utility billing, but they do a pretty large percent of utility billing. So especially moving to the new software system that we're moving to, we should be able to have a really solid idea of how much is non-utility billing, how much is full utility billing.
Have we looked at under accounts receivable, is that for like water billing area?
So it's for the customer service reps only, because the utility billing area is fully out of 81. So like Nicole and all of her her clerks and everything in the back. But the idea of the past was that because those customer service, they take payments for planning and zoning, they take payments for the city clerk's office, and they take some of the internal deposits, that they shouldn't be paid all out of 81 because they're not doing just straight utility billing.
Okay. The reason I was asking is if we ought to look at maybe hiring a collection officer instead of sending a lot of different things to collections, have somebody in-house that actually tries to collect a lot of these debts that we write off every year.
And that's definitely something that we have talked about quite a bit internally, especially for the departmental stuff and the non-utility billing. The non-utility billing, we have an ordinance, we have procedures and everything, but the departmental stuff, we don't really have anything. So our first step with that is moving to the new software where we can actually now track the invoices and we can issue statements, because out of our current software, we can't issue statements. So now we have the ability, we're going to be able to do monthly statements, we're going to be able to do more. We are having, our accounting technician is taking on that initial, so we can kind of see how much effort and time that takes and give us a plan of requesting another employee. Okay, page 14, which is administration departmental. So this is all of the city hall stuff that we don't know where to put anywhere else. So really, the maintenance of city hall, the other services. So we had a lot of one-time HVAC expenses this year at city hall, and so that's why you're seeing a decrease in the maintenance. Utilities, our gas bill has just gone through the roof, and we expect that to continue. Other services right now has the full amount of the Dudley School project in it. That money isn't obviously budgeted for next year because whatever isn't spent will carry over. And then also it has the contingencies for all the different things that carried over for that will also not be carried over. And then same thing, we don't have any new capital budgeted for FY '24, and we'll carry over whatever capital projects that we have. Continue.
Okay.
Bench warrants, really straightforward. This is the money that's collected by municipal court. The police department can use it to pay salaries and benefits and supplies that directly relate to serving bench warrants. So every year we give them some supply money and some salary and benefit money, and when they have the time, they go out and serve bench warrants. Code enforcement, page 16. Code enforcement had a change this year in its staffing. We added a code enforcement manager. So that change is reflected in the FY '24 because it was only partially budgeted in FY '23. The other changes, the big significant change obviously is under other services where that is where the abatement actions, so tearing down the houses, that's where that falls. Every year, whatever of those projects is not done, we carry that over, and then every year we give them a new budget. So for FY '24, they'll have $300,000, which is what they've had for the last several years. Same thing, capital, they purchased a vehicle in FY '23. They don't have any capital plan for FY '24. And so those are the big changes. Does anybody have any questions on
So-
code enforcement?
You said you added a code enforcement manager.
Correct.
So what did we have before?
So we've gone several different routes, but we actually did not have a code enforcement manager or supervisor for a portion of the year. They tried managing it a different way. It didn't work out real great, and so Nancy was approved to hire a code enforcement manager now.
Okay, yeah, I guess I got a little confused, but I see what you're saying now.
Yeah.
So it's
kinda-
just a portion of the year, yeah,
Yeah,
okay, I
kind of
got
switch
you.
around.
Is that the difference in salaries and benefits at 34,134? Is that a majority
That
of
is
the difference is
the
the
ma-
manager's position?
Yeah, because it was only budgeted for a small part of FY '23, so the difference in between having it budgeted for the full year of FY '24 is the increase.
How much did that manager's salary versus the supervisor's salary, how much did it go up?
We have the so how much is the manager's salary? So that makes, his base salary is 53,000, like 400, about 53,400. I believe when they had a code enforcement supervisor, it was closer to 40. But I would have to look to be 100% sure, because that's not something we have.
So it's significant.
Mhm. Any other code enforcement questions? Yeah, of course. You got to come up to the microphone. So they got to get you on record.
So when Jim left, it was before the salary survey was implemented. So as far as the salary survey goes, if you consider the implementation of that, the difference between the supervisor and the manager, I don't think is quite as significant. I don't know what that number is, but
Okay. Was just wondering.
Okay.
One more question on that.
Sure.
As far as the manager's position goes, shouldn't we have waited until budget hearings to have us approve that before we hired for it?
So we brought it as part of a budget revision because a proposal was submitted to the city manager and he approved it, and then we brought it as part of the revision.
I do remember that, I'm just.
I don't remember that being in the budget. I mean, the budget resolutions, y'all don't really explain to us exactly what all that stuff is in there. So,
The details in the packet. Okay. Page 17 is our Public Works Planning and Zoning. We had some changes here. The biggest changes here is the other services. That comes from, in FY '23, we have a an ordinance review contract that is currently underway. And so if it's not completed by the end of the fiscal year, it'll carry over, but it's obviously not something we're going to budget every single year. Other than that, this is a pretty minute budget. Covers 3 people. Okay. Any planning and zoning questions? Okay, animal control. So animal control is a part of the police department, as you all know. They actually saw a really substantial decrease in their workers' comp. When the state looked at animal control workers' comp, they decreased their rate 1.82, which the only decrease that was bigger than that is the zoo. The zoo saw a 4.13 decrease. So obviously in their recent study, animals are less dangerous or something, I don't know. So that is kind of why you're seeing the salaries and benefits go down, even though they're having their step increases, their workers' comp decrease substantially. They are requesting some additional cell phones to be able to communicate with each other. That's one of the reasons you're seeing the increased utility expense. They did have a little bit also of an increase. Their gas, similar to everybody else's, their gas went up, just pretty much like everybody else's did. And then I wanted to look, let me see what their other expenses. Their other expense, they are requesting some additional computer hardware this year to outfit their front office to where it's a little bit more efficient. So do some computer hardware upgrades there. Any other questions on animal control? Okay, next page is page 19. This is for dispatch. This budget is a little bit in flux because we're obviously actively working on PSAP. We did not have an approved PSAP board budget by the time that we put this together. So what our plan was is we would go ahead and approve the budget the way it is. When the PSAP board convenes and they pass a reviewed budget, we will need to look at obviously what we've allocated to dispatch, and to be 100% frank, we will have to increase it because the cost of PSAP is going to be higher than what we're budgeting currently for dispatch. So this is a budget as if we were still continuing to run dispatch separately, but it is going to be subject to change. Okay. Any questions on dispatch or PSAP? Okay, page 20 is going into our police department budget. So we did increase the amount of police officers that we're budgeting for this year. Last year, we budgeted for 31 police officers, which basically was having 10 positions that we never closed, we never froze, we just didn't budget because we didn't think we were going to be able to fill them. This year we're being more optimistic, and so we're budgeting 36 police officer positions instead of 31 police officer positions. Hopefully we'll be able to fill all those 36. We also had some changes in our supplies. We decreased uniforms and the ammunition expenditures. We saw a decrease in contract services because we had kind of some one-time contracts that were sitting on there. And then in the other expense, we had, again, some other one-time expenditures that were sitting in the 50/50 line, which is the non-capital equipment line. And then, again, no capital approvals in the general fund. However, the police department did receive capital outlay from the legislature in a couple different projects. So that is budgeted in Fund 24, not in Fund 11. Any questions on the police department budget?
What's our current number of certified officers?
You can tell me and then I'll tell them. 35.
So we're only budgeting for one more hire than that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Does that include command staff?
35 includes all supervisory personnel.
How many just like patrol? So, and you'll notice on the breakdown of the budget, we do break out lieutenant, sergeant, police chief. So 36, and I should have been more, 36 is patrol officers.
Is there a
Okay.
reason we budgeted for 41 last year and we're going down to 36?
Yes, so in FY '22, when we budgeted for 41, we never hit that mark. And so it was something that we have talked about for years, that we've tried, is when we budget for so many officers that we never fill, then we end up obligating funds that we know are never going to get spent. So the idea in FY '23 of obligating only 31 positions, only obligating the funds for that, was to make the funds a little bit more liquid in the general fund. Again, we didn't freeze the positions. If we had ever gotten anywhere close, like if we'd filled 31 patrol positions and they said, well, we got 5 more in the pipeline, great, we would have done a budget revision, we would have, moved it, it would have been right there. In this case, as you heard Deputy Chief say, they're at 22. So we have 9 positions allocated for funding that we haven't been able to.
If I could add, we also allocated some of that money for police service aids to help as well. And that was done in
2023, yeah.
2023 budget.
And that was part of it too, part of not budgeting those 10 was to then also budget the 4 police service aides.
So what about I thought we had an IPRA records clerk, like a specific person that
You
did
do.
that.
They're budgeted.
What are we doing away with our captain's positions?
'Cause, yeah,
We've kind of transitioned the captain's positions. They are not fully budgeted in FY '24,
What are we transitioning them to?
patrol officers.
what's a budgeted position? I just
Patrol
didn't know.
officers. So we're taking the 2 captain's positions and creating, 4 patrol officers' positions, or?
That's part of the change out.
Okay, so we'll have a chief, a deputy chief, and then we'll just go to lieutenant, sergeants, officers.
Correct.
Last year was the first year we had those service aids, correct?
Correct.
Have we received any feedback from residents or?
Okay, that one you have to come to the mic for.
Good evening. Specific feedback, I don't have specific numbers, but I do know that the service aides are taking their fair number of calls, non-emergent calls. Feedback, I guess from the officers themselves, they're helping out a lot. They're helping out with crashes and all the non-emergent calls. So yes, we've actually been debating on, depending how low we dip with police numbers, whether we look to increase service aide positions if we can't hire police officers. Now they're obviously limited in what they can do. We don't want to go that route necessarily, but
What's their actual job description for those? I mean, are they,
Well, there's-
like, say you have thefts, minor petty thefts, are they allowed to come take reports on those?
so on petty misdemeanor things that don't have a suspect, say citizen wants to report, let's just say their lawn ornament's been stolen, no suspects, no cameras, nothing like that. They can take petty misdemeanors, stuff like that. They take non-injury related crashes and crashes that aren't disabling vehicles. They can take those, and they are in the neighborhoods a lot, and they can write parking citations and things of that nature.
I just was asking, because a little incident where I couldn't even get DPS to show up to do a report. They wanted me to do it online, and I didn't know if that's what these guys technically should be doing. You know what I mean? if, in the event that an actual full-fledged certified officer can't get there, if one of these guys could come take the report and do all the legwork that's involved.
So the online reporting is meant just to be another resource.
I was
Officers,
told to do it all online, they wouldn't even come out to the site, so.
well, if you don't mind, we can talk afterwards, but about the specifics, but they should not be forcing anyone to take an online report if they don't want to. The citizen, you might have to wait a bit longer depending on the call volume, yes, sir.
Yes.
But other than that, they should not be forcing anyone to online reports.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I've actually gotten feedback the same thing, so.
Yes, I've
We
heard it
probably do
quite-
need to talk about that.
Yes, ma'am.
then. Yeah. I just thought that was like the thing you did now or something, so.
Well, it can be convenient, but again, the chief's direction was it's not a must. If they want an officer to respond and they're willing to wait, then we'll show up to their house or wherever they want to meet.
Well, that's good to know. And I read this wrong, I apologize. I had it in my head that you did not have it budgeted, but it was because it was in '23. Yeah, I got you now, sorry.
I'm just curious, what is the peak number of certified officers we had the 5 years before COVID
Ooh, 5 years before
compared
COVID?
to what we're budgeting?
Oh, I don't know. Budget-wise, I don't know what's been budgeted. In my head, I can tell you that right now, so the number's a little, total officers that we have hired on with the police department right now are 43 officers. That's from the chief down, every sworn officer. Certified officers are 35 because we have 4 in the academy and we have 3 we're hoping to send to the academy. So the 35 officers are the only ones that can actually go out and do work on their own because we don't put officers out on their own. Although we could, for up to a year, we don't do that. So backing up, I can't say that I remember us having more than 47 or 48 over the last
Okay.
4 to 5 years.
The only reason I asked is I remember some comment that 60, we considered 60 are the number we should be aiming for to be full-time. Is that
What we're aiming for?
I mean, what we would consider fully staffed?
I was just going to point out that, so these are budget authorizations, those are not actually filled positions. I think what was happening before is they were authorizing a certain number for officers, but not able to fill them. And so, the budget and actually being able to fill them, I think there's a lot of difficulty in filling those type of positions right now. So, I mean, am I right?
So my knowledge of this, and this is my first time, and Chief left me right at the perfect moment.
Notice he did
So
that. He was-
my understanding of it is for many years, we were always at 59 to be fully staffed. And I know at some point we dropped down to 58 when we assumed Jeanette Barunda, the clinician's role at 58. Again, this past year, my understanding of the budget process was it's not good budget practices to continually budget for things. It's better to be more specific. You got to correct me. It's better to be more realistic with your budget practices. So we dropped that down in my head to 48. And if we increased magically over 48, then we would basically have to request that, and we haven't got there yet.
So we're not going to deny applications if we have qualified officers,
No.
but we're above what we're budgeting.
No, and that was never the intent. The intent was to make the funds in the general fund a little bit more liquid. So to kind of give a little bit of history in that, it would have been before I came to finance, but I'm pretty sure FY 2016, they had such a huge salary savings that they moved it out and used it to buy like police cars and equipment and stuff. They had hundreds of thousands of dollars of salary savings. And so that's just not a great practice to have hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up when we would love that, for them to be fully staffed, for them to have 60 officers and everything. In the current climate, it's not realistic. I was watching the Albuquerque news the other night, and Albuquerque was talking about the same thing. Instead of budgeting for 1,200 officers, they're going to budget for 1,100 officers because they don't feel that they can fill those 100 positions, so they're not going to budget for them. But no, we never turn them away. If they can get them, we'll hire them.
I vaguely remember 5 or 6 years ago, 8 years ago, I think we used to budget for 76 positions down there, if I'm not mistaken. But,
When I was hired in 2006, we had 76 officers.
yeah, that's a heck of a downturn.
That is, yes, sir.
But the bonuses, the retention bonuses, they seem to be working. I mean, I know we haven't had that long to judge.
So since the implementation of it, we have lost 4 officers, 2 of which were receiving the bonuses and 2 of them which weren't eligible.
That's not encouraging.
I agree.
In their defense, would you want to be a cop right now in this?
Yes, I do.
Well, you're like right there in the middle of your career, though, you know, you got a few more years and you can retire, so.
No, I
A few more
agree.
years?
2 years and 10 months.
How much?
2 years and 10 months.
Cops.
I'm not counting them.
But it
Funny
is
how all those
encouraging that we
always
have 4 in the academy, and do you say 3 more possibly going?
Yes, ma'am. So 4 are due to graduate May 25th, and then if we get these 3 in, they'll go to the July Academy and graduate into November, early December, and won't be on their own potentially till probably February, March timeframe.
Can you imagine if we didn't have that? It'd be even worse off.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We're still seeing a lot of turnover to the sheriff's department or to other departments?
Yes, sir.
We are? Okay, from our department. Are we still seeing the switch back and forth?
Nope. Unfortunately, we're not getting anybody
We're not
back.
getting any of them,
No, sir.
but ours are leaving to go to the other departments.
Yes, sir.
I'm scared to ask why you think that is, so don't answer that. Just think about it, and you can tell me at another time.
Okay.
Might be what we're going over.
No, I mean,
The
in all
county
seriousness.
just recently passed a pay increase for them of how much?
Was it passed?
Well, they're, how much?
They were,
It was about 14%, right? 14%. I don't know if it has passed, but that's what they're proposing.
The governor, is that what you said? What'd
The
you say?
county.
Oh, the county. Wow.
How does our wages that we just passed recently
if,
compare to theirs
And so with this, it definitely puts the county higher.
at the sheriff's office?
way higher. After, if they get the 14 or 15%, it will be significantly higher.
We talking $1 an hour or $5 an
Oh,
hour?
no, we're pretty comparable right now. Starting salary for a non-certified officer for both the county, the city, and for the detention centers all right around the 1940 to 1950 an hour range. Certified officers in the 21 range for both us and the sheriff's office, but they will go up 15% from that. They're supposed to be pretty significant.
Go about 23.
So they'll go up
$24 an hour.
almost $2 an hour for a non-certified.
I'm not going to try to math on the record.
Math is my forte. No, math is not my forte. Accounting is my forte. There's a big difference, believe me.
And we have acknowledged that, and I have been meeting with Ashley, Kim, and we're looking at different options to bring forward to commission, so.
It's just going to be a big bidding war, like, yeah.
That's what it's been across the state. Chief Denton and I have had multiple conversations about at what point
Do you stop?
does somebody have to stop and just say, I can't go anymore, because it just seems like everybody just keeps moving up and it just makes everybody else move up. And
Honestly, you can go out here to McDonald's, they're starting people at $14 an hour, and they got a sign out there, so. I mean, it's gotta give sooner or later. That $4 million decrease in our general fund ending balance kinda has me a little concerned, so, you know.
That's pretty conservative, though. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? All right, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, so our next page is going to be page 22, which is going to be our fire department. Our fire department, again, is getting the step increases, and so that is driving the majority of their salary increase. They've been fully staffed for the most part. They've had some vacancies. The other increases that you're seeing partially are due to the fact that last year we moved almost the entire fire expenditures out of the general fund and paid them all out of the fire fund. So this year we are moving some of those expenditures back into the general fund to kind of give some relief for the fire fund, and partially because the chief has some other plans for the funds in the fire fund. So we're seeing an increase in fuels, uniforms, heating and cooling, communications maintenance are all things that we moved back into the general fund out of the fire fund. And then, of course, along with some of the capital and their building maintenance that was already in in the general fund. Any questions about the fire department? Okay. Next page is going to be page 23. That is our our school resource officers. So we continue to have 2 school resource officers budgeted. As far as I know, we haven't heard anything else from the schools that they're going to do anything else or request any changes. So that's where we left it, was at that 2 officers. So that's their salary and benefits. And that is the last portion of the general fund. So if there's any questions about any part of the general fund, we can talk about those now, talk about those later. If not, we will move into the internal service fund. Internal service fund, like I said earlier, covers purchasing, human resources, facility maintenance, IT, and fleet maintenance. So this is an internal service fund, which we are very careful to not make loads of money off of, obviously, because it's paid for by the other funds in the city. So for FY23, we are expecting an ending fund balance of $5,685. For FY24, we are looking at having expenditures of $4.8 million with a transfer in of $4.6 to combat some of our estimated revenues. We did leave our estimated ending cash balance a little bit higher than we normally do, partially because we're concerned about getting that insurance increase. And so we were trying to kind of conserve a little bit there to see if we were going to end up getting that. So that's where we're planning for Fund 12. Fund 12, very little bit. The user fees are the cell phone tower rent that is realized by facility maintenance. The miscellaneous revenue is actually additional charges that are paid for by the departments, including like the senior center has to show their internal services. They can't show it as a transfer, they have to show it as an actual expense for some of their reporting, so it's shown as a revenue on this side. But there's not really any sort of outside revenue generation for the internal service funds. And again, like we talked about, their transfer in is substantial. It's from the departments that they serve. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with purchasing, which is going to be on page 26. Purchasing is seeing an increase in the salaries and benefits for the fact that we reclassify the account specialist. Then we're also doing a repositioning of the accounts payable position and the procurement specialist. We're making them both purchasing specialists so that they can do cross duties and not get pigeonholed into one or the other, especially with our new software. The more flexible they can be and the more purchasing stuff they can do for us, the better. The other services decrease comes from another one of those one-time expenditures where we have budgeted for our procurement ordinance review, which is currently in progress. And then the other expense, we have had to increase our security, both at the purchasing building and at the warehouse location. So this is just planning for that increase in security, along with the monitors, and then they need some barcode printers to go with the new software, so we're planning on purchasing those as well. They don't have any capital planned for FY24, though. Any questions on purchasing? Okay, page 27, Human Resources. Human Resources has had some changes. Other services, there is money that is budgeted in FY23, $30,000 for the referral program, that money will roll over for whatever has not been used from 2023 to 2024. There's new money budgeted in 2024 for the tuition reimbursement program that's being put in place. And so even though other services just shows a change of $2,947, I wanted to highlight the fact that it's one program being funded in FY23 and another program being funded in FY24. Other than that, they just kind of have some small changes here and there in their expense lines. Are there any questions on human resources?
Oh, we're good.
All right, page 28 is facility maintenance. This covers our facility maintenance staff. Supplies have gone down partially because supplies went really up in FY23 to cover the cost of the pool chemicals. The pool chemicals went up like 400%, almost overnight. So we've been really lucky that they've come down some. So we've been able to decrease that supplies budget a little bit because we're not needing to buy quite as expensive pool chemicals. So we do have a decrease in the maintenance, kind of the same thing. We decreased our communication improvement and our pool equipment, just some of those things, just trying to consolidate things. And some of that maintenance has also been moved to the departmental budgets to make a little bit of change there. And then any incomplete capital projects are going to roll over to FY24. As you can see, they have a lot of capital going this year. And Paul is only one guy, and Paul's staff are only one guys. And so they do a great job, but they have some capital projects that are going to roll over too. So, any questions on facility maintenance? All right. Finance MIS, this is now IT services, so our IT services are completely outsourced to Better IT Services. So obviously our large portion is no longer salary and benefits, but it's now other services. The other services cover everything, all of our service contracts, including our service contracts on our computer equipment, our servers, everything like that. And then maintenance, our increase is coming on the increase of software support. We are constantly, it seems like, getting either increases our software support, new software, just trying to adjust our Microsoft licenses because we are more staff than we have been in a while. So we're actually using all of our Microsoft seats, which is great. So we'll be using even more of those. Capital projects, right now, the only thing that's included in capital is we have one more year left on our phone lease. So that's $115,000 a year to lease all of the phones. And then we have $80,000 for our continuous computer replacement program. So, any questions on IT?
Nobody?
Page 30 is fleet maintenance. So as you can see, both facility and fleet maintenance, I should have highlighted this, has a little bit of a change in their allocation of positions because the Public Works Director is now being allocated across the departments that she oversees versus kind of all being dumped into streets, or water, which it was before. So there is a change in the allocation there. Fleet maintenance has seen some increases in supplies, tools, equipment, just for basic cost increases. The other thing that they're seeing in other services is they need additional training for the new certifications that they need to carry for some of the vehicles, some of the newer stock that we're getting in. It's a little bit different than our older fleet that we had. Right now, fleet itself does not have any capital outlay planned for FY24. They still have some existing capital out there. Any questions about fleet maintenance? All right, and so that is it for internal services. Are there any questions about internal services? Any of those departments? Except for Paul, because he left. Okay. All right, the big one, we're going to talk about special revenue. So special revenue encompasses several different funds, all the way from corrections to DARE municipal court into community services, fire protection, some of the smaller ones like HIDA, and then all the way down to the senior center, engineering, and even into our self-insured vehicles, and then our liabilities and deductibles. So some of these don't have a lot of details, so we'll hit them pretty hard. Obviously, the recap for this is pretty large. There's a lot of different funds. All the ones that are highlighted in yellow are funds that historically have received transfers in from the general fund or are currently receiving transfers in from the general fund. As you can see, corrections has done pretty well, so we're not expecting them to need a transfer like they have in the past, but some like municipal court, community services, and the senior center, of course, will need to. This, of course, is the FY23 recap. FY24 paints a little bit of a different picture on some of the transfers. And then, of course, to point out, Fund 44, which is streets and weeds and drainage, they are funded not out of the general fund, but their transfer comes from Fund 42, which is the 1984 gross receipts tax. So while they get a transfer in, it's a little bit different, doesn't come out of the general fund. And then, of course, the new fund is also on here, the Cannabis GRT Fund is also considered a special revenue fund.
So maybe I missed something, but
Sure.
what's going on with municipal court? Why did that increase?
So they are really receiving less state funding.
Okay.
Their state funding has really evaporated. That can really be seen in Fund 19, which is also their fund, the court automation. That used to cover all of their computer stuff, all of their software stuff, and now to cover what we need to pay out of there, it requires a transfer. So not a ton of funding coming for municipal courts.
So that's due to circumstances beyond their control?
It is, and then, of course, as the courts will tell you too, though, they are a little bit different. Their revenue is deposited into the general fund. So while it looks like they only get $13,000 in revenue, their bulk of their revenue is under the fines in the general fund. So part of their $506,000 transfer is offset by their revenue. Obviously, their revenue doesn't cover all of that. And as they will tell you, the more tickets that are wrote, the more revenue that they can get. We also have a new judge, which is always an interesting transition because they have different opinions than the other judge does. And so sometimes the way they handle cases is different.
fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Fund 105, is it usually a special revenue?
Fund 105 is a GRT fund.
Okay, I just didn't see it anywhere in here, so
Yeah.
I thought it used to be in the special revenue because it's.
I think, let me look. It's in capital now? Yeah.
In capital, okay. Yep, there it is.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. All right, so, special revenue obviously has, taxes that are attached to it. Some of the funds do. It has user fees, which we haven't seen yet so far. Obviously, when we get to enterprise, they have more user fees. There is some grant funding. A lot of that grant funding is attached to the senior center and some of the other programs. But they do have a little bit more revenue than what we've been seeing, obviously, in internal services. All right. And again, their transfers in are substantial, just because they house a lot of the funds that are subsidized. All right, so our first one is on page 35. This is our corrections fund. This is the expenses that are related to the jail costs. And this is for the costs that we pay pretty much now to Otero County to house prisoners. So these are definitely variable, determined based on how many people are going to jail. So we've been pretty consistent with our amount of fines over the last couple of years. Our expenses have kind of gone up and down, but we feel that the 81,000 is a secure number.
Why did it jump so much between 22 and 23?
So 23 is still a projection. They are actually at, turn the page here. Right now, they are at 40,178.
How much are we paying per prisoner?
I was just going to ask that.
Ooh, do you know that one off the top of your head? 80 something a day?
Used to be like 80,
That sounds
$86,
That's what I was
think
thinking,
is what it was.
Yeah.
80-something a day.
And then there's kind of a go between, like, if they're a half-day prisoner, if they're a full-day prisoner, like what line that is. And I know Maria was working with the county to determine a very specific, if they're here at this time, they're considered this. If they're here at that time, they're considered something else.
Is there a way we could like set up a community service type deal to try to offset some of that? You know what I mean? Like a work program or?
I mean, I know municipal court offers community service towards your paying off your fines. I don't know if that translates to paying off your
You know,
jail
like the
expense.
non-violent guys, you know, maybe chain them together and pick up trash on the highway or something. I mean,
So I do know that Judge Overstreet really isn't sending people to jail unless it's like a DWI, which has mandatory incarceration time. But most of the time, it's usually fines, and we offset that stuff with, the community service like you're talking about. Typically, when we're putting someone in, like, jail, it's because they failed to appear or something like that, and then they get picked up, and they're only there for maybe a few days.
Okay.
So
Or
it's
the
not
re-
like
or the
we're
repeat.
having a lot of people being sentenced to jail time. That's just not happening.
There's probably just the repeat offenders is the ones we're actually really paying for.
Correct. It would be more those who just aren't appearing for court, and then
ones
they have a
we-
bench warrant, and the bench warrant gets served.
The ones we see repeatedly in the police logs.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so our next page is page 36. This is our former lodgers tax promotion portion. So what we did here is we had a cash balance that is going to be left over after this year. And so it is still tied to the former lodgers tax regulations. So we went ahead and allocated that in between supplies. Utilities is actually a cell phone for one of the marketing people, or the tourism specialist position that's currently open. And then, obviously, the big one is other services. That's the majority of the money for the tourism match for the New Mexico True application that we submitted week before last was the deadline for that. We submitted that on
So
April 20th.
that's the match for it?
That's the match.
Okay.
And then there's some additional, we didn't request $204,000 in match. It was right under $150,000 that we requested. That would be our match. Obviously, that's totally subject to what their funding levels are this year, and we'll hear back about that in May.
Okay. This is May.
You're right. I think they announce on May 22nd, so.
I was just giving you a hard time.
I know, right? I can't believe it's me. So any questions on that lodger's tax promotions?
Okay, so you said you'll hear back by May 22nd?
I think they said they announced on May 22nd, yeah.
Okay.
And then that'll determine how much we got awarded, how much our match is going to be. Obviously, if we didn't get awarded the whole amount, then we would have more funds to do, other types of
Other things
advertising.
with.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you'll bring that back to us?
Mhm.
I'm very excited to see what you do with it.
Yeah, I think we have some good plans.
Caught a lot of flack over that,
We have some good plans. The position closed on Friday, and Ronnie and I were talking today about the candidates. She's actually going to be overseeing that position. She'll be supervising that position, but obviously, my department will have a bunch of input in it as well, so.
So we'll probably get there when we get to community services, but we kind of reorged a little bit, and what used to be Josh Syed's position, the Civic Center manager, we have changed reclassified to a community affairs manager.
Yeah, I
And
saw
then the
that.
tourism person has now fallen under that, as well as marketing and communications. So that is the whole picture now in one place, as opposed to it being in different departments.
And one person doing what, we think a whole team can do now. So we're really excited about that. I think it's going to be really good.
So who's going to be responsible for the economic development? Is it the tourism specialist?
So no, the economic development stays with the finance director
Okay.
at this point.
So right now, since Evelyn has her hands full right now, I'm taking on part of that and then consulting with her when things come up, so.
Yeah. Which we're hoping we actually have a LEDA application for you guys here in the next
I
2
was
months
just
or
gonna
so.
ask.
We're very excited about that.
I was like, do I, don't I? These are budget hearings, but actually, Commissioner Mountain brought up a
Okay.
good point. Like, what is,
I think we're at the point now that everything is settled, and we've been pretty aggressive. I've submitted some site selections. We have a LEDA application. The former one that we had that you're all aware, nothing resulted in that. We weren't able to get a hold of them, so we're just kind of holding on that one, but we have a brand-new one that I just received this week, so,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so our next page is page 38, which is our core automation. We've talked actually about this quite a bit. As you can see, like we talked about, their grants are decreasing, and that's part of their state funding. And yet, they still have some additional expenses. They were granted a capital outlay grant, or capital outlay allocation from the general fund. They desperately need a new server. Their server is 21 years old, and it's still going, but it's not going to be going for long. So we're going to go ahead and buy them a new server. So that is where their capital allocation is.
That's pretty impressive that it's still going.
I know,
For
right?
21 years.
Knock on wood. Chris back there is like, oh, you put it on the universe now.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Okay, any questions on core automation? All right. Our next page is going to be page 40. This is the other portion of what formerly was the lodger's tax. So what we decided this year, because we still had residual cash left over from the lodger's tax, is we were gonna leave the Civic Center operations, the special event operations in Fund 20 to go ahead and spend out that cash balance. But we didn't want to tie their hands with just spending that cash. So we went ahead, that's why they're receiving a transfer in from the general fund to go ahead and maintain operations at the level that we are expecting. The changes in the salary and benefits comes from what Stephanie was alluding to about the reconfiguration of the Community Affairs Department, the reconfiguration of the Special Events Coordinator position. The other changes were mostly operational changes, including the increase in the utilities that we've seen. The decrease in the other services was taken from mostly from special events, but there was some other things that we had kind of put in there in a preliminary state, and we went ahead and changed that. But the special events had several different things in there that we decided to either change or kind of free up a little bit to allow the new community affairs person with a little bit more flexibility and not be tied to specific events that we've had in the past. And then, of course, at this point, there's not any capital outlay for FY24. Any questions on Fund 20?
Could you explain briefly what the community affairs manager, what their role, big picture role is?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So they will oversee, as Stephanie said, they'll oversee the tourism specialist, the 2 marketing and communication positions. They will, the Civic Center maintenance person. Did you keep this? You did keep the Civic Center supervisor and the Civic Center supervisor. So they'll be housed at the Civic Center. So their main things are going to be the city special events, you know, overseeing the tourism, making sure that that person's going, and then helping develop the big picture tourism policy, obviously along with city leadership and then with you all as well. And then overseeing communications and marketing. So that way now we're talking about having a complete, consistent message across all of our events, across all of our platforms. We're putting on this event, it's being advertised. If it's a tourism type event, it's being advertised as such. Communications and marketing is advertising as such. And then they can provide support to each other too, support for the special events, support for the tourism events, and just giving us a really cohesive, like actually working department versus kind of the pieces that we've had scattered around.
Do they have any role with the customer service people, you know, in terms of just community views towards the city and stuff like that?
Yeah, that would definitely come through like the marketing communications. When you're saying like customer service, are you talking about like the customer service people in all departments, or you talking
yes.
overall message?
Whoever has the most exposure to residents, essentially.
Yeah. We had not really talked about them being involved in other departments other than the communication and marketing specialists continuing their role of, you know, handling the communications for the departments, where just like if I went to him and said, okay, we need to develop this program for, I guess water billing is my only front-facing department, you know, for water billing and everything, that they would then, of course, help us develop the materials and push out that marketing campaign. So right now we have 2 of those positions. They're both full, and so they're a great resource for the departments.
So with that, where we were stuck with the heads in beds, doesn't count if you're not staying the night. The community affairs person is more about, yes, we have these events, there's sports events, there's these concerts, but I think Evelyn coined the feet on the street.
Feet on the street.
So that person's focusing on working with our businesses, daily day events, to include some overnight events, like we'll have the Balloon Fest, where we're going to be kind of working with them, because we acknowledge that's a true tourist event that has brought in people from over. So it's going to be a mixture, but our focus is on our community and bringing people to the community, even if it's for a day. And as far as the communications, our goal is to have all communications flow through there, so that we're doing a consistent messaging throughout the city. So if there's an issue, or if there's just things we need to get out, we want to make sure that it's in the same kind of context. We have some pretty great people in that, they're able to create the graphics, they're able to communicate really well, they are working with our website, they're working with all areas, they hands-on with each department as well, so.
Cohesiveness. Okay, any more questions on Fund 20?
I think we're good.
All right, our next page is page 42, which is our DARE Donations Fund. Real straightforward, this is where the donations for DARE come from, and then from there, they fund the annual DARE picnic, which I think is coming up this weekend, right? May 11th, yeah. So that's coming up here really soon. And it's another one of those kind of, we hope that we get more DARE donations than we budget, but we budgeted $1,000 this year, and I think they've surpassed that, and so we went ahead and did $2,000 for next year. Okay. Moving on, our next page is going to be page 43 and page 44, which is our municipal court fund. So whereas the other one was their state automation fund, this is their major operating fund. This is where they pay the majority of their operating expenses out of. They have not had a lot of changes, not a lot of increases, but they did receive a capital outlay allocation. They need a new vehicle. I shouldn't laugh, but their current vehicle doesn't have any brakes. And apparently it's quite an adventure to ride in, and Jimmy told them they couldn't drive it anymore. So they are looking, we're looking to purchase them a new vehicle, something that's a little bit more easier for them to use, because what they had before was also, had originally been like a prison transport van, and that's not really conducive to what they do right now, so.
So is that what they use it for? What do
Not
they-
any, they don't transport prisoners anymore with any regularity. I don't think they transport any prisoners anymore. Yeah, I think.
Right, so what do they use the vehicle for?
They use it, they do have to go out to the jail, and they do have to serve stuff sometimes. But I don't think they do any, and they serve subpoenas, yeah. I was like, they drive around, I knew there was something they drove around for. They drive around to serve subpoenas, and they do have to go out to the jail.
They serve us our subpoenas. So if we have witnesses that we need to come to court, the bailiff who works for the courts will go out and
Okay.
actually serve those in person to those people. We don't, whenever someone's at the court though, we don't have to bring them here for court. We're doing Google Meets is what we use for that. But sometimes they'll have to go to the jail to serve them paperwork. Or,
Right,
you know,
right.
That
Okay.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, whereas we
makes
used to have to go get them and bring them here. We won't have to do that anymore.
Right, okay.
Okay, so our next page is page 45. That's going to be our police contingency. This is a fund that we have in case we have revenue or confiscated money. We hold it here, and then we have to pay it out here. The other thing that we also maintain here is anytime that they have to draw out money to do undercover operations. This is where they pay for it out of. So pretty straightforward, just a little one.
Have we considered funding this with the cannabis GRT?
We have not talked about that. The cash balance in this fund is pretty good right now. They have $54,000. They rarely spend more than 10, so funding hasn't really been an issue. Next page is page 46. This is our perpetual care fund for the cemetery. So there is certain amount of revenue that is required to go here out of the sale of lots. And this fund is just held, knowing that in the future, we will need to either expand or purchase additional land for an additional cemetery. So that's basically what this is a savings account for future cemetery needs. All right. Our next big section is going to be Fund 32, which is Community Services. So on page 47, you have a kind of a summary overview of Community Services, but going to page 48, we'll start with the cemetery, which is the first part of Fund 32. This covers the cemetery operations. And as you can see, they are now paying for an additional cemetery labor over what was initially budgeted in between FY23 and FY24. And other than that, their changes are very minimal, a little bit of an increase in supplies. And then most of that supplies and uniforms comes from the fact that they now have an admin assistant who uses more office supplies. And then they don't have any capital outlay plan for FY24. Any questions on the cemetery?
When would an estimate be we would have to purchase more land or expand?
So this is something we've talked about a couple different times.
So we're also looking at the ordinance to see if it still works. There's an estimated 10 years out that we would have to look at it, but that doesn't, we're looking at, so if you buy a plot, you can only have 2 cremains in there, and that's by ordinance, and we're not sure if that's still conducive to what we need. So we're looking at the ordinance, but if it stays the way it is, we're thinking about 10 years out.
10 years when we buy the land, or 10 years when we need the space?
10 years when we'd start buying the land.
Okay.
I don't think we have, do we really have that much space over there left? Even for regular burials with caskets?
So we're also part of the Community Services Master Plan. They're going in there and looking at that as well and see if we need to, if that number's still a valid number, if we need to update our ordinances, if we need to start looking at land sooner rather than later, but we believe that's still fair.
I've asked about it about, I don't know, over the last 4 years, have asked about our cemetery, and it just looks like we are gonna run out. Maybe I'm paranoid, but.
And it's always such a hard thing to predict
with
because
all
that's.
the forced vaccinations, we might see an uptick in deaths. We may run out of
No comment.
space a little faster than we anticipate, so.
Be careful, we don't want to offend anybody. So.
I don't know, I think it's something we ought to start budgeting and looking at a little sooner than 10 years out.
Well, that's what the Community Services Master Plan is. That's one of the areas that they're looking at as well.
Okay. Page 50. The cemetery is always interesting part.
There's always jokes that go over.
It's always
Inappropriate that we won't say on the record.
interesting
Part of
one.
life, you know? I still think the south end of the former landfill would be a very, very nice place. It sounds bad, but it would be a very nice place to have a cemetery.
You have to name it something else.
Well, it was
Like-
never used as a landfill, it was
Right,
just a
so call
portion
it
of
like-
so
Maybe it used to belong to the Prathers, so like the south end of the Prathers or something.
Something, but, you know, can you
McDonald's.
imagine driving over your overpass and seeing a nice, beautiful green cemetery down there instead of the nasty desert?
Can we just call it like Monte Vista 2 or something?
You know?
Or continued, or?
Okay, so page 50 is the Parks and Recreation Administration. So this was a new budget in FY23 with the creation of the Parks and Rec Director and the Executive Assistant. So it was only a partial year for the salaries and benefits and a partial year for the expenses that are basically attached to the administration. So the changes there are now planning for an entire fiscal year with those operations and those positions. And this is just their administration part, not part of the departments they oversee. Any questions? All right. Leisure services, this is in almost total the recreation center. So the recreation center is fully open again after COVID, which is nice. And so their user fees reflect that change, as do their expenses. They did move around some stuff with salaries and benefits, which are kind of always in flux over there, depending on the amount of lifeguards that we need, depending on the amount of youth staff we need. So looking at page 52 has the breakdown of kind of where they're at now. They've moved a lot of positions around, changed a lot of part-time stuff. So now that they have 14 total positions. The other thing, they also were hit pretty hard with the utilities bug, especially the gas, but some of the ball field electricity also increased, kind of probably back to where it was pre-COVID, now that people are out there using the ball fields again. They are not having any capital outlay this year for FY24. They still have some big projects that they're in the process of, including the work on the retaining walls to make sure that those are sound around the pool. Any questions on the rec center?
Is there any consideration in increasing fees with the cost of chlorine? Or have those stayed steady?
Those have stayed steady with the increase that was passed a couple of years ago. That's the automatic riser.
Okay.
But nothing to the level of 400% that the chemicals went up. Okay, page 53 brings us to the parks budget. They were another recipient of a decrease in their workers' comp fee. So that has helped them with their salaries and benefits pretty substantially. They're asking for an increase in supplies, which mostly is in fuels, as fuel prices have gone up. Their other services decreases are a reduction in their contract services, and then they had a contingency line last year that was not approved this year. So that is a $50,000 decrease that is part of that. The same thing, they don't have any capital outlay approved for this year. I know that they're still waiting on some vehicles that have been ordered. And I think that there's a irrigation plan design that is still pending on there as well. Any question on parks?
We're good.
Okay. Next page is going to be page 55. This is the zoo. The zoo was pretty conservative with their revenue projections from this year to next year. They've still been seeing really strong numbers, so I have a feeling that those are ones that will revise up. Their numbers have looked really good. They do have a little bit of position change, mostly in their cashiering. They've gone from having 0.73 of a cashier, to having 2 cashiers. Which has allowed the zookeepers to not have to be in the gift shop so much and actually out doing zookeeping stuff. So they've been very positive on that. They've also had the increase in utilities, increase in general supplies. They've seen food cost increases You know, anybody who's bought a bale of hay recently knows that they're almost $30 now, where they were just 25 like 2 years ago. So they're seeing an increase there. And then they're also having to buy some additional replacement equipment that is not rising to the level of capital, but is in that non-capital $250,000 to $5,000 range. So that's in the other expense. So at this point, they don't have any capital planned for FY '24. However, did they get state funding? Yes, they have some legislative funding that they're still working on moving forward. So you're definitely, even though there's no general fund funded capital, there's still quite a bit of legislative fund capital you're going to see.
Those two positions that we're doing away with, the curator and the support staff, why are we doing away with those? Or?
So the curator actually became the zookeeper lead. It was more of a change of job title than it was an actual like doing away with the position. The facility support staff is part of what they transferred into the cashier. That was kind of a weird admin position that wasn't really earning any value. Any other questions on the zoo?
We're gonna get a giraffe.
Ooh, a giraffe.
Or when, and a lion.
Stephanie is the zoo animal planner.
I'm all about sloths and lions right now. So.
No, actually a lion would be all right. I want what was it, Hercules? I want another Hercules.
Yeah.
So
I think lions are easier to get than giraffes.
even with that, I know you keep hearing me go back to the community service master plan, but in that there's expansion. So we're just kind of, right now, we can't, but we know in the next 5-10 years, we're looking at doing some expansion. I don't know if it's going to be a giraffe, but
When do we get to see that plan?
we are working on it now. I know that Belinda, the Parks and Rec director, went up to Bonito Lake with them this week. I know Ronnie's been working with them, so I'm not, do we have an anticipated date? No.
What's it cost just offhand for a lion? I think a giraffe was around 200,000 last time we checked.
Didn't they say like we could get a lion relatively
So
inexpensively?
the lions we could have gotten free. Pre-COVID, they were 2 lion cubs free.
You gotta put them somewhere.
But we had the space, sort of. They're pretty picky now on the space. It's all regulated by whatever. But we expanded, or we finished the monkey, the 3rd section of the monkey, and that's where we were looking at putting them in there. So, yeah, we could have gotten 2 baby cubs, and I was so disappointed in COVID hit, and we couldn't move forward on that.
So page 57 is.
I like the giraffe idea.
Well, our,
We're actually really prone to, I remember when Matt McNeil was here, we talked about it all the time, and they're prone to, like, if they fall, they'll break their neck. They're very accident prone, I guess.
Yeah.
and then the height requirements,
Yeah, the height
and, I
requirement.
mean, we have our camel that's already looking over the fence and stuff,
See, that's
so.
what I was thinking. I'm like, where would we put this giraffe?
I don't know, I remember when we were kids, we had buffalo down there that were pretty cool, you know, because you could rattle the fence and they'd run and charge it. It was neat.
And the prairie dogs that had like no
Remember that?
barrier around them, and the prairie dogs were just like right
I fell
there.
into there one time when I was a kid. Fell off the wall into that pit. And they scurried
And
everywhere.
moving on.
Not surprisingly. Page 57 is the Community Affairs Department, which we've spoken about at length so far. So we do have an FY '24 budget. We will be bringing you an FY '23 budget revision that I have been working on, so that we can get that adjusted. But at the time we did these books, we just had the FY '24 in there.
So that should be filled before the end of FY '23.
Correct.
Okay. We don't
Just
have
to
a lot of time. so-
clarify, I know I asked about this. Who actually talks to a prospective business that is interested in moving?
So that depends on one, it depends on who the business contacts. If they're looking for LIDA, you know, they're most likely going to reach out to Stephanie or myself because they're going through the state economic department, which has talked with us at length. A lot of them will reach out to the Chamber of Commerce. And so the Chamber of Commerce usually will direct them back to the city manager's office if they have specific questions that the chamber can't answer. It's not something that we've talked about in terms of the community affairs portion, but it's just not a conversation we've had yet. To paraphrase Brian, this is the more the touchy-feely stuff. Okay, any questions on community affairs? Okay, so on page 58, we have the Community Services Administration. So this is where the Community Services Director's office is paid out of, including her position and her executive assistant position, and the amount of funding to fund those offices. The Community Services Master Plan, or actually not the Community Services Master Plan, but the pool design and the balloon park design were budgeted here in FY23. Those are currently being worked on. And so then FY24, those would carry over if they're not done. So this is another kind of piece of the administration. Page 59 takes us to the library. The library one looks a little bit different this year than what we've done in the past. We went ahead and we did not budget anything in miscellaneous revenue or anything in grants for any of the grants that they have not signed contracts for. So we're trying to be really diligent and not include funding that we're not 100% sure we're going to get. We are confident that the money from the county and the money from the state will still be allocated to the libraries, but we wanted to just be really specific about not budgeting things until they're signed for. So you'll notice that there's those differences there. The majority of those differences are felt in supplies and other expenses. The good news is both of those allocations are spent almost completely on books, publications, and everything like that. So if we, for some strange reason, do not get those allocations, it's not going to hurt the operations of the library. It's just going to decrease the amount of media that they're able to replace on a regular basis. And then as soon as they get those agreements and they're signed, then we'll do the budget revisions, we'll add that back, and they'll be able to continue with their media. But we just kind of wanted to show what it was like if we did not get those grants. Okay, any questions on the library?
Those two positions, I'm assuming that children's library clerk is just moving up to regular library clerk, or we're doing away with that? Or I guess we're just doing away with
Yes.
0.63.
And instead of specifically saying this person's a children's library clerk, it just made general.
Make it a general one?
Yeah.
Okay, and what's the maintenance and the page?
So the maintenance position has actually not been active since COVID. And the same thing with the page positions. Those were part of the cut from the COVID. So I think that's incorrect on FY23. I think those should have been in there in FY23.
What was their specific job before?
The maintenance, obviously did the maintenance of the building.
That doesn't
The
fall
general
under
upkeep.
Facilities, or?
It didn't at that time. Since those positions were cut, it's the cleaning of the facility has fallen under the cleaning contract, and then facilities has done the additional work. The page positions were internal, restocking the shelves, doing some of the general library.
And that kind of what clerks and stuff do too, while they're
But they do it at the next level.
next level.
So it sounds like we're not going back to the pre-COVID hours where they were open. I think they're still closed on Friday, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
but they just recently started opening on Mondays. Yes.
okay.
No plan to open on Fridays?
No, we received, right, Nicole?
Yep.
We received the one position. We received one position and good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, Acting City Manager. So we received the one position to be able to open, to get that extra day to open up because we were closed 2. Because when we lost the library pages, we lost 8 and that part-time maintenance position. So Brian had given us that position back, one position back, with the understanding we would open up Mondays again as well. So it's a big rotation for them as well. We're open 6 days a week, so it's a big rotation for all of them to work on a Saturday. Everybody works a Saturday.
So how many employees would you have to keep it, to get it back to pre-COVID?
Well, we had 8 part-time positions, which were the pages, and then part-time facility maintenance, so.
We would actually need a facility maintenance guy there to open to pre-COVID levels. I'm just asking, you know what I mean? I don't know how utilized the library is.
It's very well utilized, but it's been a
very
challenge with the custodial services, because that means we have to have custodial services there 6 days a week as well, opening for us, and it's just a struggle getting custodial services right now, everywhere. So it's tough, because that staff also has to assist with custodial services.
So pre-COVID, when were they open?
We were open the 6 days.
6 days, and and that was Friday the day they were closed? Or
And
which day were
Sunday.
they closed?
Sunday. They were closed on Sunday.
Sunday.
Monday through Saturday.
Right, and then we
how
started
come we don't go
offering,
back to that?
because we don't have the staffing. We lost 8
Oh, okay.
pages, and the pages, we're doing the reshelving of all the books and things like
Okay.
that. So that's now staff has had to take on.
I get a lot of
those
questions on it, and
I know,
I have
it
to
is.
admit that I don't use the library probably as much as well, if I had time, but whatever. Anyway, so yeah, I do get a lot of questions on that, so I was just curious.
I know, and right now, all of them, including the librarian, are on a rotation that they all work a Saturday in that
Right.
rotation, so.
Right.
Did you guys look at what it would cost us to be open the 6 days again,
Sure.
budget-wise? You know what I mean?
Well,
I know my little girl likes to go to the library, or did, and I remember one time we went by there and they were closed, and she was kind of upset over that. And, you know, it's utilized by, the school children probably more than it is us adults. But, we're finally out of COVID, and, libraries are still pretty well utilized, so.
And we've been actively talking about a solution to the custodial, because we're not happy with the custodial services we're receiving in any of the buildings. And so Stephanie and I and Nancy have all been working on, talking about how many people it would take to do the upkeep the way we want it, coverage and everything like that. And the library is an active part of that conversation. So I think with that conversation, and then it would just be, how many additional positions, either full-time or part-time, would be needed to keep the shelves up to date and the other responsibilities they do.
Yeah, Friday's a tough day to be closed.
So as now, it's Monday through Thursday, then close Friday, then open Saturday, and then close Sunday?
Yes.
So it needs to be open.
Why didn't we go from Tuesday to Saturday and leave Sunday and Monday closed?
That was just a choice that we allowed the staff to kind of, have a little bit of a weekend together to leave that closed on Monday. It was just something that they decided would work best, would fit best in reshelving books and cleaning, sanitizing books and things like that. They just felt it would work better to close Mondays.
So you guys can bring us some numbers of what it would cost to hire additional staff to keep it open 6 days a week?
sure Kim would totally be down to put that together.
It's just-
No, she would. Kim would be,
It's
not
just
not
a
that Kim, your Kim.
question. Yeah.
Oh, my
Your Kim.
Yeah,
I
I
feel-
knew what you meant.
You know,
I look at the
Our
HR
role
Kim.
as commissioners is quality of life, you know, being a city commissioner and a library, rec center, those kind of things are quality of life.
And to kind of answer your question, they get about 1,300 on average people in the library on a week because they submit weekly reports.
1,300 visitors a week at the
And
current level, at the
And I'm
5 days?
sure, yeah, and I'm sure it's going to increase during the summer.
Yes.
And how much do we get from the county for that?
That's always been an issue.
I think that's what Stephanie
Staffing.
said. I was like,
They only
it
give like
is,
15,000, right?
yeah, it's varied. Let's see. Let's look. Right. Yeah,
We
so.
don't have an agreement
So
right now?
50,000. We don't have an agreement. We don't usually get that agreement until like August. Because usually they go through their budget process, they approve it. And it's been 25 and then it went to 50. And there was talk of it possibly going back to 25, but they've left it at 50. So, you know, we'll see what their budget process comes out with.
Because at one time, I think they really reduced it, if I remember.
Yeah, because there was that year then where they cut like they cut the funding to the extension service. They were
Right.
cutting the funding like everywhere, and there was enough of an uproar that they came back
Almost
and
everywhere, but yeah.
especially like 4-H, came back at them. We did pretty good. We didn't lose too much. Like they still funded the senior center and the library.
Yeah, but my guess is that, and I don't know that we actually keep track of that, right? Whether it's citizens from the county or the city, I don't think we,
Ooh, I don't.
I
I mean, I'm
suppose
sure
you
they,
could-
I'm sure they track it on their library cards. Yeah.
yeah, it would be on, yeah, if they were checking out books or something, right? And we wouldn't, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just suspect we get a lot of county residents, that's why I was asking. Not that we wouldn't serve them, I'm just saying.
They have a little turnstile you have to put your money in.
You know, tips accepted, I don't know, but anyway, okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay.
Okay, so our next page is page 61, which is the State Fire Protection Fund. So this is the money the fire department receives directly from the State Fire Marshal's office. And so this is one that we always try and budget either as close to zero as we can, because they are allowed to carry over a lot of the funds that they don't spend. So that is kind of one of the reasons you see for FY23, their expenditures are 1.5 million versus 783. That's because anything that they don't spend in FY23, they'll be able to carry over, so that was their amount. And they allow them to carry it over for multiple years as well. So it's not like you get to carry it over once and then you lose it, like, it's an accumulation. So the State Fire Marshal is very lenient on that. So we do have a new program that was approved in FY23, which is for the volunteer firefighters to have a training stipend. So that's the $25,000 that you see in salaries and benefits for FY23. Anything unused, that'll carry over to FY24 as long as the grant allows it. And then that's the only salaries and benefits that are paid out of this particular fund. Everything else is the very standard maintenance, utilities, other expenses, equipment. Fire pays for the majority of their equipment and supplies out of this fund. And then they also have some capital that is in there for this year that will roll over to next year if it's not finished. And there's also some talk about setting up some capital for a new fire truck to be able to do a match and do some leveraging. So that'll be something that we'll talk about too when we do the carryover of the expended portion. So, any questions on fire protection? Okay, next page is page 62. This is the HIDA fund. HIDA is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program. This is where we pay overtime to officers involved in anti-drug trafficking and anti-money laundering operations. So we only pay their overtime out of here. We don't pay any of their other benefits. It's strictly overtime. And we do not budget this one until we receive the actual award. So just like some of our other ones, this money is federal, and so it can be a little finicky. So once we get the actual award agreement, we'll budget that.
Is that all we got last year, was 16 grand?
Mm-hmm.
No wonder we got a drug problem in this community.
Huh?
I said, no wonder we have a drug problem in this community. We can't combat it with that amount of money.
That's about typically what we get. They do a clawback. So if other agencies in our district don't use it, then they do give us a bump. That bump usually is in between $3,000 to $5,000. So I think the highest amount we've ever gotten is like 20, but we struggle sometimes to
Do we still
spend.
have our narcotics type deal with us, or is it through Otero County now?
Yes, sir, we do.
Yep.
Otero County.
Okay.
They're the fiscal agent for it.
We're the what, I'm sorry?
They're the fiscal agent for it.
So they're doing it through them. Do we currently have any of our officers in that program, or?
No.
No?
Okay, page 63 is the Law Enforcement Protection Fund. So as you can see, this saw a large change in revenue based on new legislation that was passed that increased the amount of allocation per officer and also increased the, there's a flat rate. So you get a flat amount and then you get plus a certain amount every officer. And that increased substantially. So again, this is another one that we budget to zero. So we are going to get about $155,000 in FY24. And so they divided that up in between other services, which is mostly training and travel for the officers. And then other expense is equipment, and then a little bit of capital outlay as well. Let me see what the capital outlay is. The capital outlay is in there just in the event that there's, I think that was where we were planning on buying another vehicle, especially if we didn't get the legislative money, which we did get, so most likely we'll revise that to some other areas. But this one is very different from the State Fire Fund. This one is extremely picky about carryovers. It's controlled by DFA, so the accountants control it. And we can request the carryover funds, but you do have to have documentation as to why you're carrying over the funds or they won't approve it. So we try and get this all spent in 1 year. Any questions on the Law Enforcement Protection Fund?
Is everybody good? It's been
Do you
a
need a
little over
break?
2 hours. Are we all good? Do we need a break?
You guys think we can finish this tonight?
Sure.
Like,
I'm just
nine?
looking because it looks like we're about
We've
halfway
been
through the
through
budget.
the big ones.
Yeah, the rest of this debt service enterprise. those
Debt
go fast.
service
Trust
and,
agency.
and the capital projects is gonna go really fast too.
Okay, so nobody needs a break, everybody's
And
good?
then after that, I really don't have much. I have like one little chart.
Okay.
Fund 37 is the State Highway Fund. This is funded with franchise fees from the garbage contract that the city has. And then it is used to fund and match the Keep Alamogordo Beautiful grant and any other graffiti and beautification efforts, usually done through the Public Works Department, but within conjunction with Parks and Recreation. So same thing that we've been talking about all night long. We are not going to budget any Keep Alamogordo Beautiful expenses until we receive the actual grant agreement, because that one changes all the time on us too. Okay. Page 38, this is the Traffic Safety Fund. This is a portion of the fees from municipal court going to this. The police department uses it to purchase supplies and other equipment to do some of their traffic safety events that they have, car seats, bikes, that sort of stuff. So this is just basically at the police department's discretion. Okay, next page is page 66. This is the 1984 gross receipts tax. We touched on this a little bit earlier. This is Fund 42. The majority of this fund goes and is allocated to the streets and weeds and drainage operation, which you can see that by the transfer out request. This one also does pay some debt service. So some debt service here and then mostly operations. 42 itself does not really have, it has a little bit of expenditures because those are the fees that we pay on the gross receipts tax. Page 67 is the summary of Fund 44, which as you can see has a couple different sections: administrative services, non-departmental, streets, weeds and drainage. So there are detail pages on all of these. Page 68 starts that with the administrative services portion. So as you can see from the position breakdown, this covers the executive assistant, the public works director, and the public works inspector. So they're paid out of here. The public works director, like we talked about before, is allocated across all of her departments. We, for the most part, most of the changes in here, the salary and benefits have to do with the new public works inspector position being budgeted for an entire year when it was only budgeted partial year in FY23. We have some additional increases in supplies and maintenance. Just as this department is building out some more, they're kind of getting a grasp on their needs. Other services right now in FY23 includes some contract services for some of the plans that we've already spoken about tonight. And then capital outlay, they had some capital outlay in 2023, but there's no capital outlay budgeted right now for the administrative portion of Public Works. Any questions?
We
Yeah.
didn't have a public works inspector in 2022, 23?
We did not. Well, not for all of 2023.
We
It
didn't
was-
have one in 2022?
It
at all?
was, no, it was a new position as of FY23.
That wasn't Dave Busick's old position?
Yeah, but Dave Busick hasn't been here for
I know,
a
but
long time.
It didn't, I know it carried through. We never carried it through.
It hasn't, since I started in 2018, it hasn't been a budgeted position.
We haven't had an inspector on the payroll.
We've had a utilities inspector,
Okay.
but not a public works inspector. Okay, any other questions on administrative services for Public Works? All right. Page 69 is very straightforward. It is one line. It is the Z-Trans contract. So this is the money that we pay every year to Z-Trans to provide the public transportation service that they do. And since COVID is over, we are back to full funding levels. Where we were in COVID, the federal government was funding like 100%. So that's why it went from 15,000 to 201,000 to 189,000. The 201 is because we had to carry over the month of June. We ended up paying in July, so we had to carry a little bit of the budget over.
Have they asked for any kind of an increase or anything?
No, they asked for the 189,254. Okay, page 70 is street maintenance. So this is the street maintenance department. As you can see, they're funded at 13.20 positions. They have made one change to the street maintenance worker, and then the step increases were part of that as well. They've requested increases in fuels. Aggregate material costs have gone up as has the workload, so we need to match our supplies and our maintenance with that workload. Same thing for other services. We've gone ahead and increased the contract services to be able to use that. The other expense, we had to restock some things in FY23 with some equipment, so we had large non-capital equipment purchases in FY23. We don't feel that we're going to need to repeat in FY24. And then, as we've talked about before, still have some capital pending in FY23 that if it's not complete, it'll carry over to FY24. Are there any questions on street maintenance?
We're just adding the one maintenance worker, that's it?
Yes,
I can see.
at this point.
And then all those other ones that other one is zeroed out, the other two, we're just gonna do away with those positions, or?
So the dispatch clerk position is actually being covered by the dispatch clerk that is in facility maintenance. And that's something that we've talked about, the coverage there, and I could see possibly in the future being requested to change that. The utility and streets construction manager, that one has been obviously changed because we don't have utilities construction anymore. And so that's more now in the street weed and drainage maintenance manager. Any other street maintenance questions? Good. All right, page 71 takes us to drainage and weed maintenance. As you can see, their salary and benefit has stayed pretty level. Their increase that they're requesting, the largest one is in maintenance, to increase the equipment and drainage maintenance as the amounts of drainage areas increase. They are working to stay up with that. The other thing that they are facing is similar to what Paul is facing with an increase in chemicals and a very aging fleet equipment group. So they are, what she's doing over there.
You're making us jealous, Eli.
You know, it's that old thing, if you didn't bring one for everybody. They have increased their equipment maintenance substantially to deal with the fact that they have an aging fleet of equipment. So that's the increases in maintenance. The decreases in other services, there is a large sediment removal contract that is sitting in FY23 that will carry over if it is not completed or if there's money left over on that contract. And then in terms of capital outlay, any incomplete capital outlay will roll over to FY24. Are there any questions on weeds and drainage? All right. Page 72 is engineering. Engineering covers our project manager, our engineering manager, and our GIS coordinator. And this fund is funded with transfers in from the various different funds based on the amount of projects that they do in the previous fiscal year. So for FY24, we looked at the projects that they oversaw for FY22, and we do the allocation based on that. So that's why you kind of see different numbers. You see some funds completely dropping off, and that's mostly because they didn't have projects that year. Pretty small in general, just those three guys. They don't take up a lot of supplies. Their biggest thing is their other services, and that came mostly from a decrease in the contingency that they had in FY23 that was removed in FY24. They did have a a slight increase then in contract services to cover some of the outside consultants that they end up using. Since we don't have a full-time engineer on staff, we do have to rely on exterior engineers for our plans and our stamps and stuff. So, any questions on engineering? Okay. Page 74 is Fund 69, which I saw Ronnie took note of, so she will catch me about the fact I used the word library. Fund 69 is one of our gross receipts tax, and it is currently dedicated to public safety buildings, fire substations, storage reservoirs, flood control projects, and library building improvements. So that's kind of a little random. So it also, right now, pays some debt service. It actually pays about $1 million a year in debt service. And then we do have a couple of projects that are either in process or pending that are being paid with transfers. So I expect some of the transfers that you see in FY23 will carry over to FY24. Questions on 69? All right. So our next portion is page 75. This is the Senior Center. The Senior Center, as we know, runs several programs: home-delivered meals, congregate meals, fitness, evidence-based, which they're actually going to relinquish, transportation, and then it also has the local funding. So it receives money from several different agencies, federal, state. They receive money from the county. They receive money from Thrive. So again, like we've been doing with everybody, unless they had a signed agreement in place for several of these funding sources, we did not budget that revenue. However, with the Senior Center, we did allow them to budget some of their expenditures, just because if they did not get some of the money that they are going to get from like the state and everything, it would definitely come in front of you all as kind of almost a catastrophic funding situation. So we said, go ahead, budget your expenditures for the state stuff, leave the county stuff out, leave some of the Thrive stuff out, and if for some reason that money doesn't come through, we'll talk about it at that situation. But the Senior Center does good work with a lot of different programs. So that's why you see large decreases in some of them. That is us waiting for agreements from either the states or the feds on some of their funding. Any questions on the Senior Center? I had a meeting with them on Friday, so I feel like I know more about what's going on. They do a lot of stuff. They really, really do. Okay. Page 74 or 77 is for Fund 74, which is the Senior Center Gift Fund. This is where we record donations that are made to the Senior Center, either for very specific purposes or for some non-specific purposes. So sometimes they receive inheritances or they receive very specific instructions within wills about what to do with the funds. And so these funds just perpetually roll over until they're either all spent or until they receive, additional funds to do the work. They have some money in their fitness donations. They have some money in their bingo donations, and they still have some money left over from Patricia Martins, who left them a sum of money. So that's what 74 is about. All right, page 78 is still named the Retired Senior Volunteer Program. Even though we no longer have the RSVP program, it's still technically our official name of the fund. I'm not really sure how to change that, but I'll have to find out. I think we have to pass a resolution. This now houses the Foster Grandparent Program and the Senior Companion Program, which are both funded by the state. And as you can see, They receive grants, and then on page 79 is a detail about the RSVP program, which we no longer have. Page 80 gives you specific details about the Senior Companion Program, and the majority of their expenses lie in the salaries and benefits for the supervisor of these two programs, and then also in other services, which is mostly their volunteer travel, their volunteer expenses. The same thing on page 81 with the foster grandparent program. They pay 25% of the senior volunteer program specialists, and then the majority of their expenses lie in other services, which again is their volunteer expenses for their programs. Any questions on anything to do with the senior center?
It is spinning, okay.
Sure.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
Part of something that is required for the money that they get from the federal government and the state
Yeah.
government is a local match. So while Fund 71 and 75 both get transfers in from the general fund, we're able to consider those the local match. And so we always exceed the amount that we have to match because we cover the the operations up to, what the grants don't cover. So we always manage to stay in compliance with AAA.
Okay. I think I got it. Okay.
Okay. All right. Page 82 is for Fund 89. This is another one of our gross receipts tax funds. This is our environmental gross receipts tax. So as you can see, it brings in about $520,000 a year. It pays a portion of the funds for engineering, and it pays a portion of the funds for solid waste, which is the convenience center. And then we do a little bit of capital outlay out of here. The capital outlay that we do out of here is sewer projects. As you can see, we have increased those. We have more of those in FY23. And then in FY24, the $250,000 in there is we always put $250,000 in there for sewer line replacement. So it's an amount that they get every year. It's great if we don't have to increase it, but we usually do. And that's kind of what you see in FY22 and in FY23. But this is restricted to the construction, acquisition, and operations of solid waste, water facility sewer systems. So it's a pretty narrow GRT. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite earn enough to do big sewer projects.
Gotta have it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every little bit.
Anybody have any questions? No?
89? Great.
Okay, moving on.
Page 96, this is our self-insure fund for major equipment purchases. So this is a
83.
fund, 83, yeah, sorry.
83.
I might have said 96. This is something that we fund with user fees from the other departments based on the allocation of their fleet insurance. So we pay fleet insurance to our insurer, and then we also do a little bit of the allocation every year to this fund. In the attempt of building up enough that if we have a catastrophic equipment failure, that we're not having to go into fund balance of any of those funds that own that equipment. And unfortunately, in FY23, we had that. We had a mower catch fire. That mower was not on any of our capital plans. It wasn't something that we had budgeted. So we went ahead here and took the $276,000, and it's actually two things. There's a mower here and there's a police vehicle here. So we took $211,000 for the mower, and another $65,000 for the police vehicle. So, the first couple of years I was in finance, we never used this, and now we've used it twice this year. So we just continue to keep this going. And if we see an increase in needing to put more money into it, we can do that.
It's only a $211,000 mower, I don't see.
Is that the one that burned over there right off
Yeah.
the fairgrounds?
Yeah.
That's a $211,000 mower.
That's exactly what I was just thinking, wow.
Cost of 3 APD units.
Did it cost even more than that, or was it about two?
Just
Yeah, and then I think we put in an additional, like, 30,000 to it, because I think it ended up being like 240 something altogether.
seems an awful lot for that mower that burned up. It wasn't that big of a mower, was it?
It's one of those boom mowers. Because not all of our heavy equipment is covered under the self-insures, because that mower was not heavy enough to be covered under the
That's why I
self-insures.
Don't know why it cost $250,000. It wasn't heavy enough.
Yeah, but
You can buy some nice scrapers, dozers, that kind of stuff for that kind of price.
their
Excavators,
scrapers and dozers are
yeah, they're
know,
getting upwards of
$500,000.
$500,000, $750,000,
Yeah.
but
easily.
I just don't see how that little tractor was $200,000.
Okay, page 84 is Fund 107. This is our self-paid liabilities and deductibles fund. So this is where we pay our deductibles to the New Mexico Self-Insurers Fund every year. And then we also pay our premiums out of here. And the other thing that we pay out of here is any lawsuit settlements and also any tort claim settlements. So when someone comes in and says, my car window got broke because of a weed eater and a rock from that, we haven't filled out the tort claim as long as it makes sense and everything's attached, then we pay that out of Fund 107. This fund was originally established using funds from the departments, so that's why it's eligible for every department to use it, and it's kind of a centralized repository for that. So that's one of the reasons that we keep a rather high budget in insurance premiums based on what we've actually spent, because unfortunately, as you all know, you never know when you're going to end up having to pay somebody out. Page 85 is our cannabis GRT fund. Obviously, this is a new fund based on the GRT that was passed for cannabis that we began receiving. Our first payment was in September for the July, or was it July? Oh, it was September, that we received our first cannabis payment. So currently, this is totally budgeted to the APD retention program. The other services number that's in there, that's the admin fee that we have to pay on gross receipts tax because they make us report it separately. But that is all that is currently budgeted for. In FY24, the city manager has not approved a proposal yet for the use of these funds, so that's why there's nothing showing up there. Once there is something that will be either brought back as part of the final budget process or as a budget revision in FY24.
And how's that reporting going? That's new, so.
It's new. We are required to report every dollar that we spend on it. So, ours is really easy because we spend it all on salaries and benefits, so. We haven't had any feedback from DFA one way or the other.
So I know you have 204 adjusted budget for 23. Do we know where we're at, the actual? I guess not, because we would be.
So when this was printed, which this was a while ago, we were at, that's the wrong page.
151,395.
So this was printed 2/6/23, and we were at 101,182. So that would have had
Yes.
through December,
This one is 151,395, and that's what's printed 4/13.
which means that would have through February, would not probably have the March numbers on it yet.
Okay.
So what did you say, 151? Yeah,
So from December to February is $50,000 approximately.
Actually so, because this would have had January, so that would have had February, March, so they had a good couple months there. We did not revise the 204,000 because we felt like we were pretty close to being on track for the
That's what I was
204,000.
wondering. Okay.
That's what we budgeted for next year.
Yeah,
What's that?
That's what we budgeted for next year.
it's,
Yeah, no, I see that.
it's been pretty consistent. It's, low end is like 13,000.
They're like totally
high
popping
end-
up everywhere, so.
High end is like 16 to 17, but they pretty much just been in that range. So, and that would definitely be an interesting thing to look at, is the correlation of gross receipts tax versus number of cannabis stores. Because I don't feel like as we've seen more cannabis stores, I don't feel like we've seen more gross receipts tax. I think it's the same. I think it's just spread out over more stores.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I think I counted
About 20.
from 10th Street going south, there was at least 10 or 15, yeah.
About
There's
20.
probably about 20.
What's that fee?
You know how I feel about that, right? I just love them. I love them.
The
Okay,
admin
sorry.
fee you're saying? on
Yeah,
that for-
so-
Is that 6,100?
Yes, so that's the money that
State charges us to
they
collect and
charge us
remit
to
our-
collect it, yeah. So that's the money they keep. We just have to now report it as an expense.
Is there any way that we could get with the league and other municipalities and counties and tell the state we're tired of paying your Gestapo fees?
You got to get your legislature to put in a bill.
We can't have the league push.
I mean, I don't think the league could introduce a bill, but they could probably find somebody who would be interested.
The majority of this GRT, that we receive is collected right here in our local community by our businesses. And the state's charging us a fee to, you know what I mean? I don't know if anybody else finds that ridiculous, but I do.
Totally ridiculous.
You know what I mean? They charge us a fee, and then we don't really even know whether we're getting our portion that we're supposed to get or
I
not.
think that's the bigger point. Do we even know if we're getting it? Yeah.
We don't. But
Yeah.
There's not a lot of transparency there.
there's no way to get with, like, say, I guess the league's not what it used to be though anymore, is it? As far as having pool up north.
I mean, when it comes down to it would have to be signed by the governor. But I don't think that it's something that can be done administratively. I think it's something that has to be done on the
But
legislative
That's what
side.
the municipal league would go rally with other communities and
Mm-hmm.
the legislators up there during the session to push to either reduce that or eliminate it. So, I guess that's a little above our pay grades.
Is the state doing anything to ensure these businesses are paying the gross receipts tax? 'Cause, I mean, you just mentioned they keep popping up, but the revenue seems stable. It's probably a cash-heavy business,
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's always something that they have to look at. So they have to report to TRD, they have to register with TRD. So I think it would be, and I'm not 100% sure how TRD would recognize if one of these companies was operating without being registered with them. I think
probably
it
don't
would.
do physical visits or anything, or
They
audits.
do, what they're using right now, they actually set up a whole thing called the Cannabis Control Division. The only reason I know about this is for the permit side of it. And they're actually using Construction Industries as their enforcement arm of that. So, like, there was a gentleman that opened one on 10th Street. He did all his work. He got opened up. CID stopped in to pay a visit and red tagged him, shut him down. And he had to go pull a permit. And so they're actually regulating them pretty heavily on that side of it through the CCD rules. I've got another one I got a call in the morning about in Tularosa that's a very similar situation. He got caught, didn't know all the rules because they're kind of making them up as they went. You know what I mean? They passed it in such a hurry. Now they're kind of trying to figure it all out. Nobody's not 100% sure on what the rules are. So
And
they
I
are
do-
overseeing it pretty heavily.
And I know that the state police have a portion of it as well, because you are required to have a certain type of surveillance system, and that surveillance system has to have a tie-in to the state police as well. So I would hope that up at TRD, they're getting those reports and reconciling those to the number of tax IDs that they've issued, and comparing that to the gross receipts tax that they're getting submitted to them.
I just don't know how these places stay in business. I mean, there's dozens of them.
There's so
Now they
many.
have to pay a tax supposedly, and I don't know. Raises a lot of questions for me.
I feel the same way about online sales. I'm like,
Yeah, the online sales, there's a software.
yeah.
And the software tracks it, and, but then again, I mean, how do you go out to somebody like Amazon and say,
Yeah.
all the New Mexico purchases?
Yeah, I feel like bigger cities are probably getting a portion of our tax for
Yeah.
online sales too.
Okay, so that is the end of special revenue. Are there any questions on anything that lives in special revenue? All right, so our next one is capital. So this has several gross receipts tax funds in it. It also has several GO bond funds that are actually completed. So we're gonna jump right into that. On page 88 is our grant capital fund. So as you'll notice, there's all zeros for FY '24. Partially, this is because our grant capital is almost completely and totally carryover, so anything that's not completed will get carried over. The other part that does need to be added to this and will be added to it when it comes to you for approval is the state legislature awards. We did not have those in place when we did the books, but we've gotten a ton more information about what we were awarded through the state. So when I bring this back to you on May 23rd, we'll have that included, and we'll highlight that specifically about what we got through the legislature. So not a bunch of stuff really to talk about Fund 24. Same thing about the next page, page 89, which is our CDBG grant, which is currently ongoing. This is the same sort of thing. Whatever is left over at the end of FY '23 will carry over to FY '24 as we move to complete the sidewalk project that's going on in District 5 right now. Page 90 is for the gross receipts tax fund, Fund 49. This one is mostly dedicated to water facilities, including filter plants and the acquisition of property rights and water rights. Right now, a portion of this is being used to fund debt service. This, in the past, has had a large transfer out to the Bonita Lake project. So with that being complete, it's not going to have that large transfer out. And then you'll notice, though, we are ramping up how much capital we spend out of here. So there are some capital projects in FY '23 that will carry over to FY '24. And then we also transfer out of this fund for capital projects as well that relate to water. Page 91 is the reverse osmosis project, which is the desalinization plant. They have till the end of this year to spend the $16,239, or you guys won't see it anymore. So that project is complete, and we'll be ready to move on from this fund. Any questions on that? Same thing with page 92, which is the flood control project, Fund 56. This is also something that is nearing completion. It is the Army Corps of Engineers, so I'm not going to guarantee that it'll be complete in FY '23, but hopefully we'll be able to see the completion of it in FY '24. So anything that's necessary to carry over, we'll go ahead and carry over. Page 93 is our GRT Fund 61, which is dedicated to infrastructure, including water lines, utilities, streets, alleys, right-of-way easements, and for the replacement and construction of those items, repair, replacement, construction of those items. The majority of this in the past has been used to fund the engineering department. However, we're looking at this possibly being another funding source for some of the capital projects that we need to do going forward. Okay, page 94 is Fund 105. This is the Economic Development Gross Receipts Tax. As you can see, it brings in about $1 million a year. Currently, we don't have any active LEDA projects that are budgeted against it. As Stephanie was saying earlier, we do have an application that came in. She has done some more outreach, so we're hoping to see some additional uses for this money here shortly. But at this point, we don't have anything that is active to budget for.
What are the other services, the 18,508?
That's the GRT admin fee. We used to be able to budget it as part of the revenue, but now we have to show it separately as an expense.
It's not really an expense, I guess. It's not an expense, it's a,
It's a fee.
it's a, hey, you owe us this because we did nothing.
It's a donation.
They don't have an expense line that's labeled as that in LGBMS.
They need. Say, what, now that everything's all computerized, what work do they actually do up there?
They request a lot of documents, like a lot of
From
documents.
us, from the city?
Yes, lots and lots of documents. Now, to get a reimbursement from DFA, you have to send them the canceled check. Can't send them a copy of the check. You have to send them the canceled check from the bank to show that the people cashed the check. So,
The actual check?
the actual copy of the front and back of the check.
Oh, copy of it.
Yeah, no,
Oh.
yeah, not the actual one,
Oh,
but you have to show.
But you guys do a lot of, like, wire transfers and that kind of stuff, don't you?
So the EFTs, they allow us to send our EFT advice that we produce, but then we also have to send a picture of the bank statement showing where that EFT transferred out.
We should start requesting that they send us a breakdown of everything that's collected and, you know what I mean?
Of all of the different
the
people that
different-
pay in their tax.
Yes, yes. Not the different.
I don't know if you could IPRA that.
You can't, no. Not the people that actually pay, but the amount that they collect, just the gross amount that they
Yeah,
collect.
just like with, like,
Yes.
blacked out names.
Based off of your location codes and the different, you know what I mean? We're like 15, I don't remember what ours is, like 150115
Yeah.
or something like that. But
I don't know.
I know that's always been a fight, is getting that information from them.
That is true.
Okay, so tell me again, who's going to handle economic development?
So right now Stephanie and I are, she's handling the outreach portion and I've been doing the financial reviews. If my software project ever ends, then we'll, take a more tag team approach on that.
What is fund balance in 105 right now?
Fund balance in 105 is,
Sorry, it's kind of small, I can't see it from here, so.
so at the end of,
Actually, you know what, I got it pulled up, it's 5.5?
yeah, so that
Or
was,
6.
that was at the beginning of 2023. So that was our cash at the beginning of this fiscal year. We're estimated to be at 6.5 by the end of this fiscal year, which will hit that. And then we're estimated at the end of next fiscal year to be at 7.6 if we don't have any LEDA payouts in between then and now.
So the only thing that I can see that we're missing with economic development would be them, they come to us instead of having somebody that reaches out, right? That would be the difference.
I don't think I understand the question.
So
The difference from where we were.
Who's actually
Yeah,
visiting the business?
Yeah, who is actually reaching out to businesses, and we don't have anybody right now that's doing that, right?
Not to businesses, so they're coming to us. However, Trish Livingston
Livingston.
her and I have been working together. So before it was OCDEC. So about a year ago is when the OCDEC contract got canceled. So we've been meeting with, I think it's Jim Lucero from the state. So we've been working really closely with them, working with Trish. So they're going through the small business development and then sending them towards us or the state, depending on the type of economic development, or I guess I could do both, actually. We updated our LEDA application to make it a little bit easier than what OCDEC was doing, to make it a more reasonable, to look at the more specifics that the city requires. I know that the financial statements, tax statements, those are some concerns that I believe the commission had expressed. But like the state says, you're requesting public money. You have to have some acknowledgement that if you are requesting taxpayer money, then you should be able to show that you're a solvent company.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm 1,000% in support of bringing it in-house. I'm just thinking, not everybody's gonna need small business development, or, you know what I mean? And so I'm trying to figure out.
When you've been doing
So-
those sites,
So-
because the state has a software kind of,
So the state has been extremely helpful with us. Like, they're constantly, hey, here's this project you might want to look at to see if you have site selections that you could put into. So the state has been extremely helpful with us. And I mean, that's their job, to reach out to communities. They used to work with OCDEC, so now they're working more with Evelyn and I. So like I said, it was slow running, but now we're there where we've gotten everything aligned, and like economic development, economics is my thing. It's exciting, so.
Yeah, okay, well then, I'd like to hear that, that's good. Because that's where I was worried, was like, are we reaching, but if they're helping us with that, that's good, okay.
okay, so on page 95, that takes us into Fund 109. Fund 109 is the Street Capital GRT. There are 2 allocations of GRT that go into this fund, which means that it is about $4.1 million a year. Transfers out include for debt service and then for other projects that are funded with transfers out from here. And then currently, we have 2.9 million budgeted in street capital for FY23. I also know that Nancy has the mostly completed street assessment that will be coming to commission to be presented along with their plan of street replacements and street upgrades. So that is what you're seeing right now, is the actually 2.7, not 2.9, sorry. And then also, any of the projects that are not completed in 2023 will carry over. The 2.7 million right now is to replace the signal heads on the streetlights throughout the city. So that's 2.6 million of that number. Questions on street capital?
All those stoplight heads, do they need to be replaced? My personal opinion, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I would really rather see that money actually goes to the road surface rather than
And
traffic lights.
there is a substantial fund balance in 109,
Yeah.
and so
Here on ours, it will be at 10.7.
Yeah, so it's projected to end the year at 11.3. Like I said, she has the street assessment to present to you, and so I expect a healthy revision out of that once it's determined what to do with that, and then once it's determined what to do with the underlying water infrastructure.
Yeah, we haven't had any major road projects in quite a while, so I kind kind of like to start seeing some orange barrels around town again.
And like I said, I know that that plan is pretty well ready to go, just we need to
Anxious
answer
to
some
see it.
water and sewer questions.
Yeah, that's always been our issue, is getting that part done. So,
Any other questions on 109?
on the street, just as a little kind of teaser, are we looking at doing any kind of a bond or anything? Or are we just gonna try to strictly pay for it out of 109 money?
So we had not talked about bonding because based on what they presented on their initial plan, we had given them what we're taking in, and they had given us a plan based on
The revenues we
the
have?
revenues that we get from this GRT. We did not ask them for a plan with, a balloon, we can bond $10 million or whatever.
Yeah, I just
I'm sure
remember
they
we
would
did
give us
that.
one.
We did that we did the 15 million, did Hamilton, South Florida, a bunch of different ones, and I think that's the one we just refinanced about a year and
Yeah.
a half ago. Or there was two, I think there was two, actually, we did two different sales, 7.5 each time.
And that might be something that we have to look at to be able to afford to do the water and sewer infrastructure in conjunction with the road. We might have to start dipping into our bonding capacity. That we've been good, we've been building it back up, so we're in a good place.
What do we have available, like 10, 12,
Yeah, last time I talked to John, he said we were at 10.
10?
Yeah.
Well, we got about another 10 years on the Fun Center, and then that'll drop off, and then that other intersection was on there as well, wasn't it? First in Florida?
Florida.
Those two
Yeah.
bonds?
Yeah.
Okay. Those should be dropping off or can be refinanced.
Unfortunately, refinancing right now is not
It's pointless. The
it's
rates are too high.
way too high, which we did good. We got in when the rates were great. We got a really good refinance, and we're really happy with them, but
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Bad part about bonding right now is because the rates are up pretty high. So.
Yeah. And everybody's a little freaked out about bonds after what went down in California.
Yeah, well, the good news is we don't have to have it, so.
Okay, any other questions on 109? Okay. Fund 114 on page 96 continues to be our sidewalk revolving fund loan program, which we haven't really had any takers on. But we do continue to fund it.
I thought we had asked, a year or two ago about doing away with that because nobody's utilizing it.
We talked about it, but there was some concern that doing away with it with the standards and specs that were coming in would possibly lead to people needing to use it. We haven't seen that, so we could look at doing away with it.
I mean, it's only, what, 100,000,
I think it's at,
145?
what is it at now? It is at 145.
How many, do you think people know about it? Or do you just offer it to them, or how does that work?
I don't know. I don't think it's well publicized. It's possibly one that could use a revamp of the policy because it has a pretty steep interest rate on it and a pretty short payback time frame. So from what I have been told, because I have actually never seen an application for it, what I've been told is that when people see it, it's not conducive to their situation.
Has it ever even been used? I don't think it ever
Not that
has.
I'm aware of.
'Cause we set it up when we were doing road projects, and typically, most people don't do anything with their sidewalks until they're forced to by the city. So when we would go in and do the street, we would say, hey, your sidewalk needs to be upgraded. So that's why we developed that program. We set it up so that it wasn't a hardship for, I think it was Spruce Avenue over here, we were doing a resurface or something, and a lot of those guys had to put a sidewalk in. And I don't think we've ever utilized it.
Yeah, I don't, not to my knowledge, and I've gone back in HT and kind of looked, but I've never seen anything specific to it.
What does it typically cost on average?
To do a sidewalk?
Yeah.
I'm
Just
not sure.
depends, whether you got a
Like,
regular
are we
lot or
talking
corner.
1,000, 2,000?
Probably to do 60 feet, probably, normal standard lots, probably 6, so it's probably 5,000 to 6,000. Actually, with today's price, maybe closer to 10.
It could, yeah, it could double.
We just set it up because we were kind of the bad guy saying, hey, you gotta fix your sidewalks the way our ordinance is written. The homeowners is the responsible party for that. And, is a way to help them get that done, have a way of doing it.
So a lot of people don't have 10,000 on hand, so.
And you may not have to replace all 60 feet, you may just have a piece that needs to be done, but it's still a couple grand probably, so. You wanna bring that before commission and take a look at the policy on that?
Lower the interest rate.
Just take a look at it, whether to keep it, do away with it, so staff knows to bring it forward sometime in the near future.
Yeah, we can do that. We can look up the policy and,
It's probably
I
been
mean,
12 or years or so since we set that up.
yeah, I think Mark Threadgill wrote it when he was in community development.
Yeah, that was
So-
his first go-around with the city, so.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah, we can definitely find it, pull it up, and just bring it as kind of a discussion item.
It was like 2009, 2010, somewhere around there.
Okay, page 97 is Fund 119. This is the little bit left over from the natatorium bond. We're basically at this point just spending the interest. I know that they're working on finishing up some of the projects that are attached to this. And then once they get through that, then that'll be the end of this. So hopefully they get those projects done before the end of this fiscal year. If not, whatever little bit they have left will carry over. But there's no new funding in this fund, just spending out the last of the interest that was earned. Fund 121 is on page 98. This is the GO bond that Commissioner Reardon was referring to for the fund center. We still have this fund open, gain a little bit of interest on it, just kind of as a hedge against the debt service. Same thing with page 99, which is Fund 122, is the Florida intersection bond. Same thing, just gaining some interest on it. Then we can move it to the debt service fund.
I feel like that was decades ago. I know it wasn't, but
It's crazy, it's been 10 years, almost 10 years
I know,
since
right?
that all started.
it feels like it's been longer than
We got
And
it
you still
halfway
refer it
through.
to as the new intersection.
I know, right?
But yes. Page 100 is the American Rescue Plan Act, or the ARPA fund. So this is the $7.9 million that we received from the federal government to do certain improvements based on COVID impact. So at this point in time, we have received all of the money. So we've received the 7.9 million. We currently have it budgeted in several different projects. We still have money left in the utility assistance portion of it. We have completed a good portion of the Alameda Park irrigation. That was funded half from this fund. And then the rest of it is in water improvement projects, tank improvement projects, and improving the IT and OT oversight systems and the water system. So that is all what is included in the capital line in FY23. Obviously, whatever is not finished will roll over to FY24. And then we'll continue to monitor as we get closer to the deadline.
How long do we have to spend it?
4 years?
How many?
4?
4? And it's been, what, 2 so far?
Yeah, yes. Okay, that concludes all of our capital funds. Does anybody have any other questions on capital? All right. We'll go into debt service. So debt service is Fund 53, which has our general obligation, which is the fund center, the streets, and the 2017 general obligation bond. Fund 59, which has most of our flood control, our streets, natatorium, and then, of course, Fund 82, which is our water and sewer principal, that has all of our water and sewer loans, including our newest one, which is the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Bonita Lake Dam Project. So if we look at page 103 for Fund 53, this is our general obligation to cover those 3 bonds. As you can see, with our property taxes, we are covered every year. We're required to fill out a form that we send to DFA. They check all of our requirements and make sure that we're within our capacity, which we are. And then, of course, the principal and interest is based completely off the debt schedule.
What's that 2017 bond? What did you guys issue in 17? I think that's what you said.
Yes, so the 2017 bond would be the natatorium.
Natatorium, okay.
Yep.
That was some upgrades to the rec center and some other stuff.
Yeah, it was originally supposed to be the pool, but it wasn't enough money, so it ended up being quality of life increases or improvements. So it's paid for
Very
probably
the same. That was the
25
zoo,
different
golf course.
projects. Yeah,
okay.
it's paid for a ton of different stuff. Page 104 shows the breakdown for Fund 59. So, of course, the fund itself does not fund the debt service. In this case, these are projects that are funded by 42, 69, and 109. And then the principal and interest is based off of our fee schedule. I believe we have one that is getting close to being able to be paid off. I believe the flood control is within like the 2-year time frame, which is always a plus. And then on page 105 is Fund 82, which, as we talked about, funds our water and sewer system debt. We pay this with a transfer in from 49 and a transfer in from 81. And like I said, our newest loan is the dam project, which, being one of the drinking water state revolving, means that half of it was forgiven. And so we only pay debt service on half of what we're given, so. And that's our debt. Any questions on debt? Okay, our next part is going to be our enterprise funds, which are water, sewer, and operating, solid waste collection, which is convenience center, the Bonita Lake Campground, the golf course, the airport, and the landfill. So starting on page 81, on page 108 for Fund 81, I was trying to kick us back. As you can see, for water and sewer, we came into this fiscal year at 15 million. We're projected to come out of this fiscal year at 10.6 million. We are projected to go in with the 10.6 million. We're projected to go out with 10 million even. There is a reserve on that due to the debt service that is paid out of there. We are expecting with our revenues at this point in time, we're kind of planning a little bit of a decrease. Partially, we do that every year because we're never 100% sure where water consumption is going to go. We have recently seen a decrease in water consumption, and some of our monthly revenue numbers have seen a bit of a decrease. This is also not including some of the changes that we're going to be requesting as part of our rate study that we've been working on for quite a while now. That will be something that we'll bring to you all separately as part of many meetings and workshops and many discussions as we start figuring that out. But, so these projections are based on our current rates that we have in place right now. From there, 81 has the transfer out for the debt service, to 12 and to 63 for engineering. It does receive a transfer in from solid waste to pay for some of the go-betweens in between it and the convenience center. And then in terms of expenses, or is there any questions on 81 revenue, water revenue? Okay. So we're going to talk about, first is page 110 is going to take us to Bonito Lake. This is Bonito Lake water, so not Bonito Lake Campground. And this project is pretty well complete. There's possible that we'll have a little bit of a transfer or a carryover from FY23 to FY24 as we're trying to finish up some of the last pieces of stuff that came along with the dam project and everything like that as well. But this is not nearly as active as obviously it has been the last couple of years. Any questions on Bonito Lake in terms of water? Okay. Page 111 is for central receiving. So this is the warehouse portion of purchasing. So they split expenses with the internal services portion of purchasing. So as you'll notice, not a lot of big changes in what is a pretty small department. The only big change is the other services, and that is coming from, we needed to increase what we were budgeting for writing off obsolete material. We're going through and we're finding a lot of stuff in the warehouse that was either over-ordered, it's not usable, or is just become obsolete. And so that's something that we do sell off through our auction process, but a lot of times we're not obviously going to get what we paid for it, and so we do have to write that expense off. So that's the increase there. And then we don't have any capital outlay planned for central receiving in FY24. Any questions on central receiving? They have put a ton of work in with the new software. The warehouse is going to be really cool. They have barcode scanners, and they're going to be able to issue everything electronically. They've done a really great job. It's going to be really cool. So if you haven't been to the warehouse, once we launch the new software, go to the warehouse. Okay, page 112 is the administrative services portion of Fund 81. So this funds a portion of the utilities director, the executive assistant for utilities, and it also funds a portion of the safety coordinator that is housed in HR. Previous to FY24, the golf course superintendent was also paid out of this. We understand why, but we decided to change that. So that's kind of why you're seeing a decrease in the salaries and benefits. The other change is in the other services, and that is just a refigure of the administration fees that the enterprise funds pay each year to the non-subsidized enterprise funds pay each year to the general fund. So we recalculate those each year, and that's the difference in between what we calculated for FY23 and what we calculated for FY24. Any questions on the admin part? Okay. Page 113 is customer service. So this is utility billing. So as you can see, we did not make a lot of changes to the salary and benefits, to the staff part. We did not request any new positions at this point in time. We just have some little changes through our expenditures, our increase in supplies. We needed to increase our postage, our fuels went up, and then we're also seeing an increase in the cost of meters and the cost of meter parts that we buy out of those lines. But we did increase or decrease other services because we had some one-time expenses related to the kiosk that we've installed in the lobby. So we don't have to pay those one-time expenses anymore. We're now on our yearly maintenance. And then in the capital outlay, that $300,000 is the yearly amount that we're starting to put aside, knowing that we're going to have to start replacing our radio read meters here sooner rather than later. And it's probably going to be maybe even sooner than we thought. The system has been down on the national level for, I think we're going on 2 weeks now. We don't know what's going on. They say that they're going to get it back up, but that's why you haven't been able to access Aquahawk. And we've had to go around and collect information more manually until they get that system back. So we might have to be going to a different system sooner rather than later. So that's going to be a couple $1 million.
It was such a great deal we got on that.
Yeah, exactly.
High roll.
And so that is kind of what we have budgeted for customer service / utility billing. Is there any questions on that? Okay.
You're gonna be asking to hire more meter readers?
So when I said we didn't get any new positions and we didn't ask for, we did preliminarily ask for one. We did actually ask for another meter reader position.
You did?